Hello, everybody. I just went straight to the reading screen here because, you know, it's basically the same thing. I need to turn back on my chat. There we go. How's everybody doing tonight? Tonight we are narrating the 5th book of the Tales of Love and Magic series by Mr. Bogath. It's called A Kiss of Blood and Blades. I'm gonna put a link right here so you can buy it yourself. We're gonna pin that. There we go. Sorry for starting my stream late though. The kiddo puppy sat for a few hours and, or not a few hours. It was pretty much an all-day thing. But, they ended up being later than they thought they would be. So, because they were getting their car fixed or something, I don't know. You know how that is sometimes. They tell you it's gonna be like, just like 3 hours, and then it's gonna be like 4 hours, you know, that sort of thing. But, yeah. And then I also still have my coloring book, and I cannot pin 2 things, but I'll pin it tomorrow. Tomorrow we're gonna try to finish off. Hopefully we'll be able to finish it. My last panel, which is my about panel. I just have to do, some shading and all that good stuff. And of course the little panel box at the bottom. And then we'll play some Final Fantasy 3. So Monday I can play Black Myth Wukong, because that's been a fun game. And I've actually enjoyed most of it. I mean, I spent most of my time trying to defeat baby Thanos. So baby-headed Thanos. It's funny. But we're gonna go ahead and get started now. Hang on one second. Alright. So, A Kiss of Blood and Blades. I'm gonna massage the spine a bit, because the spine is very stiff. Let's see. Have to decide what kind of background music I would like. Is your personal favorite in the series? I think I actually like it a lot too. Not sure if it's my favorite. I don't know. May not even have a favorite. Hard to decide. Let's see. Ooh, fantasy music seems pretty good. We don't want it to be too loud though, so that ought to be pretty good enough. We'll just have to keep an eye on it. Alright. Book 5. Chapter 1. Rose sat quietly in her room, waiting to be summoned by the royal physician. She knew this time was different. Deep in her bones, she knew. Her mother's gradual decline had been a source of tension for the entire queendom, but none more than the court itself. An uneasy peace held everything together. Valencia, once a queendom of constant jostling for power and the throne, had settled into an established order. All thanks to Rose's grandmother, Rose Marie Valencia. If only she hadn't been one of the most despised and feared women on the continent. Rose picked up the hand mirror from her nightstand, holding it in front of her. A normal, red-haired girl stared back. Nothing would be unusual, except... She took in a deep breath and exhaled, allowed herself to relax. The golden glow filled her eyes, overtaking her usual blue and casting a faint light on the mirror. One of the most infamous traits of her grandmother, and she'd inherited it. Some kind of evil magic must reside in her, too. She'd trained herself on a method to hide the glow using her breathing, but she couldn't keep it up for very long. The rest of the time, she took on a timid persona, allowing her to keep her head down, much to the disappointment of her mother and other advisors of the court. Most had hoped she'd keep her head held high, shoulders back, exuding authority and assertiveness as her mother had in her prime. Instead, that was her little sister. They'd always been the best of friends ever since they were small children, with her sister only being a year younger. In recent months, they've grown distant from one another. Was it their mother's decline? Perhaps it was her own fault. She distanced herself from everyone after all, her sister being no exception. She wasn't a naive child anymore. She knew exactly what the glow in her eyes meant and knew that her priority going forward in this life must be to hide it until the day she died. That was best for everyone. Crown Princess, a soft voice came with a knock at her door. Yes? Your mother would like to see you. It's urgent. Thank you. I'll be right there, Rose replied, sucking in a deep breath. The moment was coming. The moment she'd been dreading for so many months. The moment she'd done everything she could to prepare herself for, but found herself completely unprepared all the same. She stood to her feet, left her room, and walked to her mother's chambers, only a few rooms down from her own. The physician opened the door and ushered her in. She was a kind old woman and understood this was a private conversation. She closed the door behind her as she left. Rose, is that you? Come here, Rose, her mother whispered, struggling to convert her short supply of breath into words. Rose hated seeing her like this. It was painful, given the sharp contrast with the mother from her childhood. So vibrant and strong and athletic, skilled with a sword, an expert rider, a dancer, and a woman with legs that carried her like the wind itself, now reduced to this. She couldn't make out her own daughter, even from a few feet away. Her once tan skin was now chalky and pale. Her hair, flowing in vibrant red only a few years ago, was now thin and dark under the dim light of her mother could tolerate. Even her scent had changed. Rose grasped her hand, tears already flowing down her cheeks. I'm here, Mother. I'm here. It's me. It's Rose. Her concentration was failing in her grief, and she was sure her eyes had resumed glowing. Only her mother wouldn't be able to see. It was a blessing in disguise, as it was the last thing she needed to witness before she died. Had they been glowing when she walked in? Had the physician seen it? My precious daughter, I'm sorry to place this burden on you at such a young age. You're barely a woman, and I'm forcing... She paused, taking in several deep breaths. Yet I'm forcing you to take the throne. Please don't be afraid. I've arranged for Count Blackwell to make the transition as easy for you as possible. You will have many trustworthy advisors to help you until you are comfortable. More than all of that, I know you are kind and that you will be... More deep breaths. Panic this time, as though she worried she might not be able to finish saying what she needed to say. A wonderful queen. You have always had a good heart. Just don't let yourself be shoved around or bullied. You will be the queen of a matriarchal queendom, no less. You still haven't seen the golden glow, right? No, Mother, neither of us had, she lied. If it came to it, she would gouge out her own eyes and simply live a life as a blind woman. That would be far easier than living with the pain of knowing she'd become a disappointment to her mother. Please don't worry. Grandmother's curse is far from us now. She smiled, nodding and squeezing her daughter's hand. Thank the heavens. Are you still there, Rose? Yes, Mother. I'm here. I'm listening. I've already spoken to everyone else. Rose, promise me you'll never use it. Please. Rose's whole body tensed. Mother? Oh, I'm so sorry. It's hard to concentrate. I'm getting confused. That's right. You said the glow never came. That's such a relief. Yes, Mother. You will be the greatest queen Valencia's ever seen. Rosemarie Valencia III, surpassing her mother and finally dispelling the shadow of her grandmother's curse. Please take care of your sister. Rule well. I love you, Rose. Please ask the physician to come back. You should retire to your room and get some sleep. Rose collapsed to her knees, embracing her mother tightly with both arms. There will never be a better queen than you, Mother. I love you. Please don't leave. She patted her daughter's arm gently. That choice is not mine to make, but God's. Now go. I would like to rest now, and tomorrow will be a big day for you. Rose obeyed this time, slowly releasing her mother and sniffing hard before rising to her feet and approaching the door. She knocked, signaling to the physician that it was time to return. When they passed one another in the doorway, Rose did her best to turn her head and look at the floor, knowing that this would be her most vulnerable time to be discovered. She returned to her room, shutting the door behind her and falling face first onto the bed, sobbing. She sat awake in her bed for hours, overwhelmed by the thought of life without her mother and the responsibility of leading her country as queen. She'd once heard of a woman who went blind because of a traumatic event and decided this would be the best course of action. She could just feign blindness while buying time for a better solution. She just needed to find a cloth to wrap around her eyes. Deciding she may as well get changed and try to get a little sleep, she slipped on her black nightgown and began rummaging through her drawers for a suitable cloth to hide her eyes. Suddenly, the door flew open, startling her so badly that she nearly fell to the floor. Who? She stuttered. The man said nothing, taking a step toward her as he kicked the door shut behind him. There was an urgency in his step and a startled look on his face that she'd never seen on a man. She immediately covered her chest with her hands and took a deep breath to scream. The man stepped forward quickly, placing his hand over her mouth. I'm so sorry. Your mother has passed, but that isn't why I'm here. You don't know me. I served the late queen directly, and I've been given only one task in my life, a secret one. To protect the heir at all costs. There's a coup underway. Your truly loyal advisors are being killed, and someone will visit you soon too. I'm just glad I'm not too... The door flew open again, and two more entered. Both stopped in their tracks upon seeing someone who had already beaten them there. Let the other know, a woman's voice said. The man who entered with her nodded, spinning on his feet and making a move for the doorway. Only the stranger stopped him, kicking the door closed as his only right hand made it through. His hand was surely broken. The woman pulled a dagger from her belt, plunging it into his stomach. He winced, but grabbed her and flung her onto Rose's bed, drawing his sword from his belt and burying it in her chest. The other man drew his knife, but was slowed by the forced use of his non-dominant hand. His attack was parried, and a skillful slice upward from the stranger opened the man's chest. He gasped, but fell dead. Blood had covered Rose's face, and she could feel something welling up inside of her. It should have been fear, but it wasn't. It was a heat, an excitement like she'd never felt before. Her entire body tingled, as though she'd been standing directly above a comforting flame. She took a step back. The stranger clutched at his stomach and steadied himself on his sword. We must go before they wonder why their assassins haven't returned with good news. Quickly! He grabbed her wrist, yanking her forward. Their eyes met and he froze in place. God save us all. I should kill you myself. Those who seek you out are a greater evil. I will keep your secret. Your cheeks are flushed from the scent of blood. It's only a matter of time before this curse overtakes you, but you must at least hold your sanity long enough to abdicate. Then you should take your own life. You can't die tonight. Without giving her the opportunity to respond, he pulled her along behind him. They emerged from the room to an empty hallway, continuing to an empty room that she'd been told was an old bedroom for servants. They passed behind a false wall, and he closed it behind them, grabbing a torch and lighting it as they entered. The stranger was on death's door and had been from the moment they'd left her room. She'd expected to be ushered into a secret room, somewhere in the palace, but the longer they walked, the less sure she was where they were anymore. Every half an hour, they'd reach a rope. He'd pull it, and rocks would collapse behind them. Eventually, timber gave way to stone. They walked for nearly 2 hours in total before he could no longer go on. The safe area is just up ahead. It's been recently stocked with nearly a year of food and supplies. The fresh spring runs through the safe water. I won't be able to take you the rest of the way. He collapsed, leaning his back against the cold stone wall. Wait, Rose said, grabbing his shoulders. I need you. I'm not someone who can survive on their own. My curse. Maybe I could stop your bleeding and then... He grabbed her wrists, pushing her away, sending her falling on her side. Don't dare touch me with that devilry. I'd much rather die than have my soul stained with the foulest of all magics. Rose buried her face in her hands and cried. I'm sorry, I didn't choose any of this. It's I who should be sorry, he said, his voice softening. I know you didn't choose it. I should pity you, not be angry. To lose your mother so young and be afflicted by the curse. You truly are a most unfortunate soul. God have mercy on us all." His body went limp and he slumped over. His chest was still. He no longer drew breath. There was something about being pitied by a dying man that cut Rose deeply. In this moment, she truly wanted to die along with him. She'd let everyone down, became a disappointment to her mother, and wasn't even allowed to save the stranger who had rescued her. Despite the self-hatred she felt, something within picked her up and propelled her forward. The basic, deepest human will to survive. Maybe it really will be for the best, for everyone, if she ended her own life. A dignified gesture for the good of all of Valencia. Perhaps that day would come. However, the stranger was right about one thing. It couldn't be tonight. End of chapter 1. I have to adjust my headphones and get a drink of water. I accidentally put them too far back. They were sliding down the back of my head. Or at least they feel like they weren't in the right spot. But now they feel more like they're in the right spot. This music video is actually not all that long. It's only an hour. Alright. Chapter 2. 6 months later. Diana pressed her ear firmly against the wall. The muffles were difficult to make out, but she learned to decipher them with surprising accuracy. When had she started suspecting her uncle? Today, after their argument? Last week, when she overheard him accepting a bribe from a wealthy merchant family? Perhaps it was 6 months ago, when all this chaos began with the surprise crowning of Queen Oline Valencia, with her uncle emerging as chief advisor, all before the previous queen's body had gone fully cold. No, it was 24 years ago, the day she was born. Even a newborn can tell the man was up to no good. Oh, who was she kidding? Everyone trusted her uncle, or at least pretended to be. As the former spy master, there were very few in the queendom he didn't have dirt on. Rather than turn his attention outward as previous spy masters had done, he turned all his attention inward, toward Valencia's own citizens. She stepped away from the wall in frustration. The man was far too cautious. Even though she was certain he didn't know she was there listening, he still used so many veiled words and code phrases he may as well have been speaking a foreign language. She made a mental note of what she could, filing it away, hoping to decipher it another day. By now, tricks weren't even necessary. Word had spread that the crown princess, once cherished by all, had become afflicted with the curse. In her grief, she'd taken her own life so that a pure queen could take the throne. Only there was no body for the funeral, nor was there a body to be buried in the royal tomb. The new queen claimed it was because of the curse, but this didn't sit well with Diana, for 2 reasons. 1, because even the infamous Blood Queen didn't receive such a treatment. 2, because her father disappeared that same night. A coward who abandoned his family and his country out of fear of his own brother. So she was told. So everyone was told. She pressed her ear to the wall again. "I'm counting on you two to be discreet. No loose ends," he said. Diana could hear it clearly, since he'd raised his voice. An important order. As a royal assassin, one she understood all too well. No loose ends. Perfect. Finally, a lead. The target must be important. Someone organizing opposition, most likely. A potential ally for someone interested in doing the same. What better way to introduce yourself than to save them from an assassination attempt? They'd be quick friends, no doubt. Diana quickly left the room in complete silence. She memorized the faces of the 2 women well before they made it to this room. None of it was difficult. They were fellow assassins. 2 of the best. Not the best. That honor belonged to her. So then, why wasn't she summoned? Could the target be her father? Knowing the 2 assassins as she did, she took her time to prepare, as she knew they would. She put on a peasant's dress of her usual tight-fitting leathers. Unlike other kingdoms, Valencia was a matriarchal society. Men of neighboring kingdoms would have criticized her for her immodesty, all while oogling her large chest, of course. Though she preferred to pay attention to the oogling of young women, as was her preference. It beat asking awkward questions about their own preferences, after all. Respect, whatever that meant, was very low on her list of priorities. Fun was higher. Next on the list was a black wig. She kept her own hair long, but the color was too uncommon. If they noticed the top-heavy strawberry blonde in their periphery, dressed in any fashion, it might cause the two to become suspicious. She needed to blend in. Dirty black hair and a cheap dress would do the job well enough from a distance, and the flare of the dress would do well to cover the arsenal of weapons she kept on 3 belts. 2 crossing around the waist for her heavy custom daggers, and 1 around her left thigh for her throwing knives. Satisfied with the bare minimum preparation, she occupied herself with chores around the stables, a place with a secret exit that she and others loved to make use of. She bent down, knees in the mud, and began weeding near the fence. Only moments later, the 2 women emerged, glanced around, and were satisfied that the only servants were present. She knew it. The target was outside the palace. If she kept her composure and played this out carefully, she might reunite with her father. Although he was a pious man of the church, he was her best friend in the world. She missed their hunts and nights out drinking together. They were frequently mistaken for a couple, which always got a big laugh from them. All the things she took for granted. She shook herself from the daydream. She needed to pay attention. Already things were feeling off. She'd been following them for several minutes, and they hadn't collected horses from the stables even though they passed right through. She'd assumed this was because it was only a short distance. It must have been for another reason. It wasn't long before her question was answered, as the 2 veered off the road and disappeared into the dense forest. It was possible they noticed her and were leading her into a trap, but it was a chance she'd have to take. She could still outwit and likely outfight the 2 of them if it came to it. The time she'd spent hunting with her father had made her a ghost in the woods. She'd never been good with a bow the way her father was, but she had a knack for tracking. Something about this area of the woods felt familiar. She'd been here before? She stayed far enough behind them it would be impossible to see or hear her, relying only on her tracking ability to keep their trail. Eventually, she came to a rock cliff, and her memory was returning to her clearly. Her father had taken her here once. She remembered. They discovered and explored it together when she was 13. If he'd not told her, that could only be one thing. He'd kept the knowledge from her in order to protect her, which meant the cave was being used for something very important, a hideout. These assassins weren't reckless, so the fact that they left their rappelling gear attached to the tree along the edge of the cliff meant they did not know they were being followed. The next part was risky. Without safety gear, she had to run a nice pair of leather gloves gripping the small rope, and no doubt earn some nasty burns, or worse, on her hands. This would handicap her in a fight with her daggers, and leave her open in an ambush at the top of the rope. A scream jostled her from analysis. A woman! Her father must be away gathering food or supplies and left her alone. The princess? Diana grabbed the rope and slid down, not worried about taking her time. As she'd thought, her leather gloves held up poorly to the task, and by the time she'd gotten to the bottom, a line of terrible blisters ran along her palms, digging into the flesh. She tightened her hands into a fist and relaxed them several times, satisfied she could still grip her daggers. Drawing them from her belt, she charged inside. The cave was vast, and she couldn't see. Their living area must be somewhere with access to light. So it was right or left. She had no choice but to wait until a scream came again, or risk going the wrong way and being even later to arrive. No scream came, but loud talking echoed through the surprising volume. Enough for her to follow, being careful of her own exaggerated sounds her boots were making on the stone. Diana knew screams, the good kind and the bad. There was a distinct character to the scream of someone having a dagger plunged into their body, and it was easy to tell apart one from one of surprise. Whoever this woman was, she'd been startled, but hadn't been yet attacked. "Please, I don't pose any threat to Valencia. I'm never going back. Just leave me alone," the voice said. Definitely the princess. No, the queen. The real queen. "Come down from there and let's talk. If what you're saying is true, we'll leave and never bother you again," the woman replied. "A lie, of course. No loose ends. It's not like we want the blood of a princess on our hands, you know. All we were asked was to make sure you weren't a threat. Killing you was a last resort," the other assassin said. "No loose ends." All this talking was highly irregular. She must have found a nice little spot above them to squeeze into. "No! Let go of me!" the princess screamed. Not a scream of surprise. This one was desperate. One of them had grabbed her. Her voice was shaky. She was being dragged. They'd never hear her over that noise. Now was her chance. She sprinted through the dark, careful of her landing on the invisible stone. She merged into the room. Fortune struck again. Their backs were to her. She walked up behind the one standing back and watching, cupping her hand over the woman's mouth and slipping the dagger into her back, following along the natural upward curve of the blade. It was designed for ease of use for this exact purpose, after all. The struggle didn't last long and was quiet enough. No other assassin could kill with the calm that she could. The steady hand of an experienced surgeon. Once, she'd even confessed to her father that she enjoyed the killing, was excited by it. She'd asked him if there was something wrong with her. His tears caught her by surprise, and he hugged her tightly. She'd expected him to say he was disappointed or that he'd pray for her, but somehow that reaction made it even worse. The other assassin glimpsed her out of the corner of her eye, quickly letting go of the princess and charging her without hesitation. She moved to parry the strike, but the damage to her hand was worse than expected, causing her to drop a blade for the first time in her life. It was probably also the last time. As the assassin raised her blade, she was nearly tackled to the ground by the princess. She hadn't got a good look at her until now. Her nightgown was ripped and torn all over, exposing much of her body. Her hair was wild. She looked more like a wild animal than a princess, fearful but mad with fear. She'd been wearing a blindfold over her eyes that had now slipped away, revealing a glow. Diana's lips curled into a smile, a wholly inappropriate reaction for the realization that flooded her mind. If the princess was in this state, it meant her father wasn't with her anymore, even though it must have been he who brought her here. He'd never let her wear torn rags like this, even in hiding. If he was missing and he wasn't here, she knew beyond any doubt what his fate was. Her uncle would pay for this. All those smiling, laughing, smug. Thank you for following, Dr. Diamond G. All those smiling, laughing, smug, ugly aristocrats, merchants, and foreign diplomats who supported them. They'd all pay. They'd pay dearly, and more than that, they'd suffer. The assassin saw the golden glow and immediately let go, falling to the ground. She kicked at the floor, desperately retreating. "No! Don't use your blood magic on me! I'm sorry! I'm sorry!" The princess took a step forward, holding up her hands. The assassin screamed. This kind of scream she'd rarely heard. One of the basest of horrors a human can experience. Involuntary, shrill. Fear in its rawest form. The assassin held her own blade to her chest and plunged it deep, straight into the heart. Diana couldn't blame her. They'd all heard the stories about the Blood Queen. It was said that she could make a person feel pain that couldn't be imagined by the most demented torturer, or described by the most sadistic, creative poet. It was said that no one could stomach being in the same room with her when it happened, no matter their experience, so she worked alone. The stories caused more than a few sleepless nights for those who heard them. When the princess turned to her, she expected to see tears or remorse. Instead, her cheeks were flush and her eyes glowed in intense gold, her face speckled with blood droplets. She was fighting the joy she felt, and it made Diana angry. She shouldn't be fighting it. She should embrace it. Valencia didn't need another queen like her mother. Someone who had turned a blind eye to everything and let others handle the dirty work, away from her fragile sensibilities. Behind the scenes, things were even worse than they were when her grandmother was queen. Diana knew one thing to be true. Only monsters could kill monsters. She picked up her dagger and licked the blood from its blade. She stepped toward the princess, grabbing her by the wrists and pulling them together. She threw her blade to the ground, wrapping one hand behind her head and the other gripped the side of her neck, pulling her into a kiss. She wanted her to taste the blood, knowing full well she may be forfeiting her life. The taste of blood to a blood mage was something they supposedly avoided. It awakened a surge of emotion in them that couldn't easily be controlled. It was worth dying for. If this turned her into a savage blood queen, filled with bloodlust, it's exactly what the new Valencia rulers deserved to have unleashed upon them. She'd hoped she'd be the first of many corpses to come. Instead, she felt her own wrists being grabbed, and then she was shoved against the wall. The princess leaned over her, running her tongue along her neck, following a line of blood that had splattered on her during the fight. Diana felt a jolt pass through her entire body. The wounds on her hands were closing, and the stinging pain disappeared. "Did you think I'd lose control?" the princess asked, surprised. Diana had no retort. Alright. That was the end of chapter 2. Already, things are getting, pretty heated. Both in a romantic way and a, fighting kind of way. Right? Alright, let me get a drink of water, and then we'll continue. Thank you for following, B-boy. Alright. As noted in my pin, you guys can check out the book in the pinned comment. Mr. Bogat. Although I have to say that none of these are necessarily none of these are not safe for work either, so I mean that would be against Twitch's rules. Anyway, you know how Twitch is hardcore about these not safe for work rules. Alright. Oh no, wait. I guess it's this chapter 2. Hold on. Nope, there's a typo here. Chapter 3. It sounds like a good book. It is a good book. I've actually read all of them. A typo? No, yes. It says chapter 2 instead of chapter 3. I'm sorry. I could have probably picked that out a long time ago, but apparently I was not paying attention when I first read this. By the way, Mr. Brogath here is the author of the book. Say hello, Mr. Brogath. So there is in fact a typo. I went back, the other chapter definitely said chapter 2. So this is chapter 3. Rose sat silently on top of the damp cave floor, patiently waiting for her savior to process the information given to her. She didn't even know the woman's name, yet but guessed that the strange man who had helped her escape on the night of her mother's death must have been important to her. Yet, she didn't cry. She only sat silently as Rose did, letting moments pass by on their own. I'll have to fix that 2 years later. It's true. It has been a while since this book's been out. "What's your name?" Rose finally asked, after several long minutes, breaking the silence. "Diana Blackwell. That man I asked you about was Kenneth Blackwell, my father. Did he know you were a blood mage?" Rose nodded. He realized right away. At the moment's excitement when I was attacked, I couldn't suppress the glow of my eyes. "And he still saved you, even though he always said we can never allow a blood mage to rule again." Father knew more than he let on. "He said those who were trying to kill me were a greater evil than blood magic. I'd like to say I know all the answers, but I don't. I have suspicions, but no proof." Rose shrugged, rising to her feet. "Well, good luck. I should start packing up everything. I can and start looking for somewhere else to hide myself." "And why not hide yourself among the flood of refugees trying to escape your queendom? That should be easy enough." If this woman was trying to provoke her, she was choosing the right words. "What? Refugees? Oh no, don't let me overburden you with intimate knowledge of your own people, your majesty. After all, you didn't even ask. You surrendered to usurpers, to fear. Just go find somewhere to wait for your death while your people suffer. Hey, don't let me stop you. And why would I force myself on a people who didn't want me? No one wants a blood mage in the world, much less leading their country. Go back and report that you killed me after I killed those 2 assassins with my horrible magic, and you'll surely be rewarded and hailed a hero. I'm sure the concerns of a blood mage hiding within the queendom is the reason why everything is in disarray." Diana stood up, standing nearly nose to nose with her. No one had ever had the audacity to get in her face like this. It was oddly exciting. Or maybe it was the human interaction that was exciting. This was the first human she'd had a conversation with in 6 months, after all. "How would you know?" "Oh, thank you for following, Mr. Microwavable." "How would you know? The first part of that lie should have been true. You could have killed those 2 assassins like specks of dust beneath the foot of a goddess, and yet you nearly let yourself be killed by them." All for what? To avoid using your power? You may think you're being selfless, but you're the most selfish royal I've ever met. So what if everyone hates you? Valencia needs you. People are starving, being jailed for criticizing your sister. You to leave Valencia in the hands of monsters? Yes. There's like a whole bunch, and then there's a little back book after it, and like the anthologies. I really like the art for this series too. Mr. Bogart's artist was pretty good. And then there's actually like a big thick book with all the pictures in it, and some art by me too. Monsters? Rose asked. She couldn't help but giggle at the irony. Monsters, you say? She held out her hand toward a rat scurrying nearby, and it squeaked. A gob of blood lifted into the air and floated toward her, landing on her hand and enveloping her arm until it was slowly absorbed into her own body. She feasted on the life force of the animal, using it to restore her own. Her eyes glowed brighter as she used the power, casting a golden light on the surfaces of the dim cave. Now that she saw it, she would surely understand. Only someone mad wouldn't run away screaming or fall to their knees begging for their life. Only a fool would. Diana ran over to the rat's corpse, picking it up and looking it over, as though she'd discovered a rare gem in the walls of the cave. This is amazing! What happens to the blood you absorb? Can you turn it into other things? Amazing! It was dark, twisted, and grotesque. It was evil, if not downright demonic. Blood magic had the most tarnished reputation of any magic known on the continent. Even the necromancers wouldn't associate with blood mages, and even the witches feared them. You are truly disturbed to call this amazing, Rose said, sending blood back into the rat, which sprang back to life. Diana dropped it, and it ran away. I see. You can return the blood if you don't take it away for too long. Do it to one of their corpses, she said, pointing to the assassin closest to them. What is wrong with you? Rose asked, tilting her head. Tell me, when an invading army shows up at the border, who would the queen send? Philosophers, priests, farmers? Thank you for the hydrate. Oh, hello, Sunny. Sunny might be joining us today. The cat. So if my model starts freaking out really bad, you know why. What was she playing out here? Her own army, of course. Of course. Your Majesty, you are a monster. A terrible one. You struck fear into a hardened assassin just by raising your hands. She was so afraid of what you might do that she took her own life. That's power unlike any other. You may as well be a dragon. No, a demon. Rose hung her head and sighed. Are you finished? I'm not, Diana said, grabbing her by the shoulders. You're all so beautiful and kind and misunderstood. You were going to die before harming someone else. A monster can take back the throne and then be a benevolent queen, can rule from it. Both things can be true at once. A good queen sends her own army to fight an invading army. Not because she is cruel, but because she loves her people and will protect them at any cost. If she doesn't use violence against invaders, her people will be the ones to suffer. My mother's dying moments were spent worrying about whether this power had manifested in me. Your father implied he was only choosing the lesser of two great evils and would have preferred to kill me. Now, based on what you've told me, my own sister conspired against me to seize the throne. Everyone is a pretender, bowing and smiling to my face while plotting to my back. I'm tired of being alone. Look, I don't think your words are wrong, but... Diana held her finger to Rose's lips and smiled. Whoever said you'd be doing it alone? From this moment forward, the only way to make me leave your service is death. Are you insane? You'd willingly offer to serve a blood mage? Even worse, in order to bring about a second Blood Queen's rule? You're still looking at everything from the wrong perspective, Your Majesty. Rose, please, just Rose. I've known you for less than an hour and you've already believed me more and done more for me than anyone I've ever known. If I ask you, will you help me to escape to Arthurist? Diana stared at her for a moment, but eventually nodded. I will, if you ask it of me, and I'll cover your tracks. I just know you will regret it. News of your people's suffering will continue to reach you. Things will worsen as opposition continues to be silenced. I could walk into the castle right now and rip the blood from their bodies. I've practiced for months using my abilities for things even my grandmother hadn't discovered, and I can control myself when exposed to small amounts. Still, would you really have me step into the palace and turn it into a bloody tomb for everyone in it? Of course not, Diana said. Rose was relieved. Maybe this woman wasn't as hinged as she thought. That's a relief too. If you did that, they'd gain sympathy from the other kingdoms. They need to make mistakes. They're far more likely to make those mistakes when they're terrified of the monster hiding under their bed, ready to devour their blood, as they sleep the moment they allow their eyes to close. Those who have wronged you, when they've suffered enough sleepless nights, when they've turned on their own allies out of fear, when they've crossed the line in the opinion of other rulers, that's when you strike. The church didn't send aid when rebels took Arthurus, even though a witch burning their castle courtyard, because the bishop had overstepped and made too many mistakes. Thank you for following Exit Music for a Film. He lost their favor. With the church's support, it would have been impossible. Because the people supported the witch, everything changed. Even as vilified as witches were, it was nothing compared to the infamy of the blood mages, Rosa said. Good. Will you try it? Rose looked at Diana, allowing herself to make eye contact. She felt comfortable with her, despite her apparent depravity. She didn't have to think twice about hiding her eyes or any part of herself. It was nice. It felt good to be in the presence of someone who didn't mind saying whatever was on their mind, who didn't fear her. What would you have me do? Diana pointed to one corpse, then the other. Drain them dry, turn them into husks, freezing the expressions of horror on their face. Next, write a letter in blood, in your own handwriting, so someone can recognize it and verify it. It needs to say something ominous, something that inspires a feeling of impending doom. The Blood Queen sends her regards, Rose asked, smirking. She'd meant it as a joke. Diana nodded, considering it with a seriousness that should have been unsurprising. That should be my line, I think. I will kill whoever you need disposed of with discretion. I can leave the message for them. For these two, maybe. Rose recovered some parchment from the small cachet of supplies and began writing in blood with her finger. She handed it to Diana, who read aloud. This is the fate that awaits all who usurp the Blood Queen's throne. I live, and I will return soon to reclaim it. Rose Marie Valencia III. Diana nodded. Queen Rose Marie Valencia III. Otherwise, this is perfect. Rose looked at the two corpses and frowned. I'm still not sure I have what it takes to do this, Diana. I'm not sure I want to. So, how skilled are you now at hiding the glow? I can hide it at will now, except in the most extreme moments, or when I'm not suppressing my magic. Diana smiled. Let's prepare a gift for the palace, and then you and I need to make a trip to the port town of Bellenhurst. But that's a half-day's ride on horseback. I thought you didn't want me to escape. Surely sending these corpses back won't be enough. It's much easier for me to get the supplies I need there. Let's just say that the law enforcing the market has become rather lax in recent months. I promise you that once we arrive in Bellenhurst, if you decide to flee, our next destination will be the gates of Arthurus. You can wait until we arrive to make your final decision. Rose nodded. Let's go then. Diana laughed. Not until you're at least as presentable as livestock. Alright. I am going to actually run to the dragon's restroom real quick. So I'm going to leave you with the commercial. And I shouldn't be too long. Are you, or a dragon you know, suffering from an understocked gold hoard? On April 5th, 1933, President Roosevelt ordered all gold over a small value be turned in exchange for smelly, dirty, paper human money. On June 5th, 1933, the United States officially went off the gold standard. Do you know what happens when a dragon's breath touches paper money? Dragons have had to resort to desperate measures, assuming human-like forms, depositing this paper money into human banks, and working jobs. Gone are the days you could burn down a castle and take its treasure. Many dragons are working on rebuilding their stocks of gold, but the exchange rate from feeble green paper to beautiful golden metal is very challenging. Please consider supporting dragon streamers with a donation, Twitch subscription, or art commission. Your donations will go toward gold bars and coins, which will eventually allow your dragon to sleep on a bed of gold again. It's the only way for a dragon to get a proper rest. Please call the 1-800 number below on your screen to make a donation today. Thank you for your kindness, generosity, and compassion. Are you, or a dragon you know, suffering from an understocked gold hoard? On April 5th, 1933, oh my goodness! I was muted. I thought I had unmuted myself, but apparently I messed up. Anyway. Hello, Mr. Bluegas Gaming and Jigsaw's following into place. Thank you both for following. What do you mean that you want to help? The best thank you speech ever giving. So tragic. I know! It's the scarf. I always think that I click the unmute button for my mic and then somehow I don't know how I miss it. I don't know how this works. Anyway, but thank you for following. Thank you for following. How are you both doing? Alright, Chapter 4. Though she dreaded the long ride at first, she soon wished... I'm gonna have trouble. There we go. Though she dreaded the long ride at first, she soon wished it would go on for longer. The woman who she'd intended to use to escape the country, who she was certain was also using her for revenge, had laughed and talked with her for hours as they slowly traveled along the road, turning a long trip into an even longer one. It was almost as if they were drawn to one another, as though it was fate that arranged their meeting. By the time they reached their destination many hours later, it was a feeling they'd known one another for a lifetime. Arriving in Valenhurst, Rose didn't really know what to expect. She'd only been there once, and as a little girl. Her mother was a kind woman, but very overprotective. She rarely left the capital, and naturally her daughters didn't travel either. The more Rose thought about it, the more she understood the criticisms of her mother, including those Diana mentioned. She never took part in state affairs or went out to meet her people. She left all of that to others and simply lived life as she pleased. To a young girl, it seemed empowering. She'd only heard stories about other kingdoms, where a woman's only job was to marry, bear children, and create connections between powerful families. Men made all the decisions, and nearly all the rulers were men. It was so strange hearing those stories, since it was the opposite in Valencia. Her mother indulged in hobbies, while others performed her duties. Hey, Poltervine! Fine for her, but it did little to secure the future of her children. Instead, it allowed others to accumulate power and prepare in secret, knowing that there'd be little to no possibility the queen would ever find out about their scheming, the effects of which were clear once they passed the gates. Sorry, ladies. We're crowded for the next few days. Lots of visitors, so you may have difficulty finding a room. Big auction coming up at the end of the week. Some of the goods are on display now in the town square if you'd like to have a look before you find your room, a man said cheerfully. Diana nodded and dismounted, motioning for Rose to do the same. The man took their horses and led them away. Oh, I wonder what kind of merchandise they're auctioning off, Rose said, tapping her chin. Is it the supplies you mentioned needing? Diana sighed, forcing a smile. It will be easier for you to just have a look. I haven't been here to see it for myself in person either, so we'll be seeing it together for the first time. You'll see just how much things have changed. Rose was perplexed. Everyone seemed happy. If this was the worst show of Valencia's supposedly terrible predicament, she really wouldn't feel guilty for leaving. But no, she needed to look harder. She couldn't be like her mother any more than she wanted to be like her grandmother. She needed to look in order to see, pay attention to the faces, listen to the tone of voice, watch for signs. There were a surprising number of foreigners there that didn't feel out of place in a port city. The ships here could transport goods all around the coast of Nethalos, and was one of the few points made with Peritris, the Holy Kingdom across the sea. Then Rose spotted the first sign. Why are there no Valencian soldiers here? The armed men and women bear no crests. They're mercenaries, she said. Diana nodded. Good, but look closer. How many children have you seen playing outside? We've passed some cheerful people along the way, but what do they all have in common? Rose glanced around again. Wealthy merchants, but why is that unusual for a trade port? Rose asked, genuinely confused. Diana sighed. This was a bit too nuanced for a sheltered princess. It really will be easier to show you. If I remember the layout of this place correctly, we should come up on the market area any time. Rose suppressed the urge to ask more questions for now, waiting patiently. Patience was never a trait she possessed much of as a child, but one she'd certainly learned in solitude. Are those? Rose asked, pointing toward the cages ahead of them. Keep your head about you. Sorry I didn't offer a warning, but I was afraid you'd refuse to come if I told you the whole truth. Diana replied, placing a hand on Rose's elbow, as if to steady her. Come on over, a woman shouted as they approached. You're just in time. Got a real fresh one sent in from the central farmlands this morning. Father and mother couldn't pay the new tax rate, so they sold their son to us instead. We got a good deal on him and we're prepared to pass that deal along to you. No need to wait for the auction. What do you say? Slavery is illegal, Rose exclaimed, her hands trembling. The woman's face went from eerily pleasant to deathly serious. Diana was quick to react. She laughed, elbowing Rose hard. Ha, better be careful. That sense of humor is going to make these people add us to some list. Rose did her best to smile, but she did not know how convincing it was. Oh, you know me. Never had the best comedic timing. The woman laughed so hard you'd have thought Rose told the best joke in the entire world. She took the saleswoman's role seriously. Everyone knows the law doesn't apply here in Valenhurst. Where have you been? Living in a cave for the last few months? Rose flinched, but forced a weak laugh. How did you know? Exaggerated laughter from the woman again. I'll tell you what, this one's pretty ugly. You ladies are here for a strong worker, right? Perhaps one a bit more handsome. She walked past the boy's cage, who looked off into the distance as they had been talking. He was far too young to be here, well over 6 feet tall, but hardly even a man. Rose could feel emotion stirring. A woman banged on the cage of several handsome young men, a larger cage with 4 men inside. This is more like it, Diana said, elbowing Rose. Right? She was provoking her, but she deserved it. Diana was right. If she'd known what was happening here, would she even come? Even now, she had the urge to flee. Right, that's what I'm talking about, the woman said, banging on the cage again. These men are chiseled specimens, suitable for work and play. She grinned, winking at Rose. Come over here, 449. You'll be the luckiest one here if you get purchased by a couple of delicious young things like these two. The man stood up, no hint of emotion in his eyes. He was completely defeated. Rose reached for the woman's face, a dim glow appearing in her eyes and quickly becoming brighter. Luckily, the woman hadn't met her gaze yet. Your flesh will be too dry for the crows to rip apart, Rose said, feeling as though she was having an out-of-body experience. Like she was hearing the words of a different woman entirely. Diana panicked, grabbing Rose's wrist before she could fully extend her arm. She shot the other hand up to her face, covering her eyes. It was a miracle that no one had seen. The woman had been looking away, and the slaves were all looking down at their feet. She nearly made a costly miscalculation. Excuse me, what's wrong with your friend? The woman said, her eyes wide. Well, you really are terrible at this, Diana said. Not only could you not tell that this woman is a dignified member of a wealthy family and that I'm her bodyguard, but you called her, what was it? Delicious, I believe you said? Could you not see that your handsome men were doing nothing for her? My lady prefers the same sex, so much that the sight of a half-naked man's body makes her feel ill. I had to act quickly to cover her eyes, idiot. She pulled Rose around, dragging her as they walked away. Come, my lady. We'll come back later when your temper has cooled. The woman was dumbfounded, but didn't go after them. After they'd gotten a suitable distance away, and where no one could hear them, Rose yanked her hand away, revealing that her eyes had gone back to normal. Why did you stop me? Isn't that why you brought me here? To see me flood this place with the blood of slavers? Lost your nerve? Diana put her finger to Rose's lips, letting her finger run slowly in a circle, completing the top and bottom, smiling seductively. Oh, my sweet queen, you are so very wrong. I want nothing more for you than to do that very thing, but have you already forgotten? The auction isn't until the end of the week. Many other slavers are on their way here as we speak, along with other wealthy merchants and aristocrats who either funded it or want to take part. You can free all the slaves and punish all the wicked slave masters in one blow. But why stop there? Don't you see? We get another very special bonus out of it. Rose shivered at her touch and had the sudden urge to reach out and force her closer, to kiss her violently. Since when did she have feelings like this? For anyone? And what she had just said to the slaver? She'd never spoken to anyone like that in her life. Was it truly okay to give in to temptation like this? Rose took a deep breath, trying to stabilize her thoughts. Taking out the slavers would be a quick way to gain support from the people. Even the Blood Queen is preferable to slavers. Probably. Diana nodded. And I already know the family responsible for this. That's how I knew to bring you here. I witnessed the bride being given personally. I intend to pay them a visit on your behalf at the same time the auction is happening. Then we'll meet at the inn just outside the capital, a little place called Raincoat Retreat, where we'll plan our next move. I'll have you sitting on that throne in mere months. So, are you in? I'm in, Rose said without hesitation, on one condition. Oh, and what's that? If I lose control and completely give in to the power, you must promise you'll kill me. No compromise. I need your promise. Diana looked at her and wondered why it was so difficult to agree. It was a fair request, given the risks. Yet, she hesitated. Promise me, Rose repeated. Okay, I promise, Diana said. Then I'm in. Chapter 5. That was the end of Chapter 4. Sunny has made it to where I don't have any room hardly to put this book down and get a drink of water. Okay. Continuing on, we're on Chapter 5. 3 days later. Diana arrived at Wessel Manor less than an hour's walk from Vellenhurst, scouting it from afar. Madame Wessel had been a generous donor for the elite's newest priorities. And quite the donor she was. She founded Vellenhurst Shipping Company, which developed into what Vellenhurst is today. In other words, she owned the town. And now, under new management, she was part owner of the entire queendom. As usual, Diana made the right call on a hunch. Madame Wessel stayed in her manor tonight, despite the big auction, and only sent some of her associates to oversee on her behalf. If anything happened, she would be a safe distance away and could just deny any ties, just as she always did. It worked fine under the previous queen, and even better under the new one. What she hadn't expected was heightened security. Even though the great Gloria Wessel had been given free reign of the town, clearing out Valencia's soldiers and replacing them with her own lackeys, she didn't get this far without being paranoid. Paranoia would make this difficult, but only for amateurs. Diana was no amateur. She showed up early and had walked the streets surrounding the home since early morning, donning various disguises when she needed to get closer. She'd timed and memorized patrol schedules, estimated shift changes based on the two she'd witnessed. She could see how competent the guards were based on their demeanor. Unfortunately, they were quite competent. She'd likely hired them from Valencia's own elite, veterans with many years of fighting experience. On the surface, a wise decision. In truth, a lethal mistake. Soldiers were especially prepared for things they were trained to be prepared for. If a mob of lunatics were to charge the front gate, 2 soldiers could dispatch them with ease. An experienced veteran might even do it alone. On the battlefield, worrying about a potential assassin was the commander's job. Killing the other man on the battlefield was the soldier's, so they rarely worried about it. Evidenced by the fact that she'd found the back of the manor completely unguarded, with the ledge conveniently leading to Madame Wessel's room, she knew it was her room. The curtains gave it away because the woman had a love for all things red. Ironic, as she'd soon be seeing plenty of it. Diana jumped and caught the edge, pulling herself up just enough to peek over it. There was the silhouette of Madame Wessel, sitting in her bed reading a book. A glass of wine sat on the table beside her, and a bottle next to that. Good. It was unlikely they would be interrupted by servants. She texted to handle the door. Unlocked. "Ah, it's you," Gloria Wessel said, without looking up from her book. "You know me?" Diana asked, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. "Of course. You're the Reaper, the collector of debts." She punctuated the last title with a laugh. "Seems you do know me, but I'm not so sure I'd laugh just yet. You may not find the next few moments so funny," Diana said, drawing her dagger. "Maybe you're just lacking a sense of humor." Diana grabbed a chair from the corner of the room, quietly sliding it in next to the woman's bed. "You know, I'm a bit early anyway. I've already written your farewell note. As we speak, a blood mage is killing everyone responsible for your little slave trade. Well, or worse," Diana said with a quiet giggle. Madame Wessel grew pale. "Blood mage? What?" Who was lacking a sense of humor now? Diana teased. "No, it's just that there's no way I'd believe such an obvious lie. Seems the new queen and her advisors can get the gullible to believe just about anything." "You shouldn't speak so ill of your friends just before you die. It's poor form." "Friends? Ha!" Madame Wessel smiled wide, downing what was left of her wine before holding out the glass, waiting for Diana to refill it. She humored the old woman, filling it to the top again. "Perhaps I chose the wrong word?" Diana asked. "Tools. Useful idiots. Means to an end. Far from friends, my dear. When you get to be my age, you'll understand that. I grew up under the rule of the Blood Queen Valencia. Both of my parents were killed in her little house-cleaning effort. They were good people, my mother and father. They paid the price for all good people pay in Valencia. Look at me, my dear. This mansion, the wine you just poured, with a small fortune itself. Servants, bodyguards. I've lived a life of luxury, and all I had to do was walk across the less fortunate in order to get it. Do you think I wouldn't do it again? Ha!" Diana certainly couldn't argue. After all, she knew what this woman said was true. Her father might have been the only righteous man in the palace that night, and he died like a dog in the dark corridor of a cave. All while her uncle enjoyed newfound power and influence, taking bribes from women like this, and experiencing pleasures in excess. Unlike others, Diana had never tried to fight against such a world. She'd only fought for her place in the moral gray. Only villains could stop other villains in Valencia. Only monsters could kill monsters. "I know you'd do it all over again. I didn't come here to lecture you or try to make you change your ways. It's too late for that. I don't care if you grew up in the land of outcasts or beneath the blue skies of Vistania. Whether you were a peasant or a princess. Whether you are happy to be evil or whether you viewed your own actions as good. I'm only here to deliver a message. you'll appreciate that the message isn't even for you. As you said, a tool, a means to an end. That is your role. How very admirable. You intend to take back the throne and do what with it? Sit on it yourself? Or perhaps you can plan to sit your fictional blood queen on it so you can use fear to bully others into submissions from the shadows. Not that you asked for advice, my dear, but I suggest the latter if you're undecided. Still don't believe it? A fake simply wouldn't suffice. Maybe an experienced manipulator like you and others in the court might pull it off. But I'm not nearly as smart as all of you. Madame Wessel studied her for a moment, then slowly placed her wineglass on the table. You really aren't lying, are you? I can see it in your eyes. Regardless of the truth, it's clear that you believe what you're saying. If true, then I really am fortunate to the very end. Better an assassin come to collect my life than a blood mage. Well, what are you waiting for? Oh. There's only one reason an assassin takes her time, Madame Wessel. You've realized it by now. Madame Wessel sighed, picking the glass back up and downing its contents again. Diana promptly refilled it. I see. You're hoping to get a few names before I meet my very end. Very well. I'll give you a single name. Brunswick. Brunswick? She didn't know a... Oh. A large man stepped into the room. Yes, Lady West... Assassin! Careless. How could she be so careless? She'd misread the old woman buying herself time for the moment of calm resignation she'd seen so many times before. She should have known a woman like this could continue calculating to the bitter end. Diana pulled a throwing dagger from her thigh belt and hurled it toward the man, who deflected it with his sword. An expert technique few men were capable of. Only her follow-up was too fast to be matched by the heavier sword, and the second dagger buried itself into his neck. He dropped to his knees, clutching at his neck, but this wound was fatal. She turned her attention to Madame Wessel, who tossed her glass of wine into her face. Well played. It burned. A lot. She blinked, wiping at her eyes, quickly regaining her focus, just in time to see the small dagger moving toward her. She grabbed at her wrist, but only had time to deflect the blade into her shoulder. Breaking the woman's wrist, she did what she came to do, and should have done earlier. She ran her own dagger across the woman's throat. She turned toward the balcony just as the other two men entered the room with crossbows. The first bolt missed her completely as she dove through the doors, the second catching her in the back of her right arm just below the shoulder. The sudden jolt of pain was enough to disrupt her landing, causing her to roll across the ground. Luckily, nothing was broken, and she sprinted into the woods. She'd only hoped that Rose's plans were going better than her own. It's the end of Chapter 5. Hold on one second. Alright, I just had to inform Mr. Brogath of another title. The chapter headings are all messed up in this book, so he's gonna fix it in the morning. Or maybe he'll get OCD about it and fix it when I'm done with my stream tonight. He's OCD about these things. I probably will. Oh, my tea was not, my tea was definitely still a little bit too hot. But it's fine. It's fine. Definitely opened my throat a little bit. Chapter 6. Rose could feel her blood boiling inside of her, and her confidence seemed to grow by the second. It took every ounce of restraint she could to muster to suppress the glow. She moved through the crowd, listening carefully to any conversation she could overhear, noting the many faces. Many from other kingdoms had shamelessly come to take advantage of her people. But they weren't the worst. The worst among them were her own people, going around and collecting their fellow Valencians. If only the founders could see them now. Many believed that a matriarchy would somehow differ from the kingdoms ruled by men. The past 100 years showed the result of that. The short answer was that there was no meaningful difference. Women, like men, craved power. Women, like men, would exploit others when they got that power. Slavery in her queendom, in her Valencia. The punishment for this transgression would soon not be forgotten. Like her grandmother, she would inspire stories to give nightmares for years to come. Only this time, it would be the evil among them who would fear, who would bear the burden of sleepless nights, lying awake, terrified of the coming retribution of the new blood queen. A woman stood on stage at the town market center, waving her hand and calling for silence. Fellow true Valencians, I welcome all of you here today to usher in a new age for Valencian glory. An age of wealth and prosperity for all our country. No more will we hinder ourselves for the sake of antiquated morality. Valencia will not be a country to cater to the weak and struggling, but through their sacrifice, eventually be the rising tide that raises all boats. A fitting analogy here in the greatest port city on the continent, no? She recognized this woman, her aunt, Claire. This woman knew how her mother felt about things like this, and yet she dared to speak in favor of this kind of treatment of her mother's queendom? No, her queendom. Rose's skin felt as though it were ablaze. Her blood pumped through her heart like a star on the verge of a supernova. Could she bear to wait longer? No, she must. And now I introduce you to our generous host, Vellenhurst's governess, Lady Mayweather. An applause echoed over the crowd as the middle-aged woman stepped on stage. No, you're all too kind. I'll keep my introduction brief, because I know you are all eager to take advantage of our first monthly auction. Many of you already had a preview earlier today and took advantage of some early deals. Thanks to the new law approved by our wonderful new Queen of Valencia, everything has done to obtain this merchandise was above board and no laws were broken. Everyone part of this auction either sold themselves willingly to erase the debt or sold by a legal guardian if below the age of entering a valid contract. Knowing that, please don't think anything ill will come of your participation in today's auction. Everyone here is safe. Bid to your heart's content. And now, the final introduction, your auctioneer for tonight. Former dock foreman, Joanna Rudy. Another applause and some whistling. They'd spent the last few months cleaning up the centers, or they were too afraid to show. Not a single boo or jeer to be heard. Good. This would make her job much easier. Another middle-aged woman stepped on the stage, all smiles. Welcome, everyone. I think we've made all the introductions needed. And as I'm sure all of you are tired of waiting and eager to part with your gold for labor, pleasure, and future profit. You're forgetting an introduction, Rose said, shocked by her own boldness. In that moment, it was like watching a different person from outside of her own body again. A strange sensation. Still, it was what she planned to say. Just that it was so easy. She thought she might be nervous, but quite the opposite. She trembled with excitement. And who might you be? The woman asked. Rose stepped toward the stage, but a large guard stood in her way. She held up her hand and he collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Another guard approached, with the same result. Whispers moved over the crowd like a chaotic wave. No doubt many were in disbelief, not sure what they were even witnessing. You don't recognize your own queen? Rose asked, standing in front of the three women. Rose? Claire asked, her face pale as she took a step back. Kneel, Rose said, eyeing the three women, her eyes now visibly glowing a vibrant gold through the dim night. We'll never kneel to you, Joanna said. I don't even know who you are. I've seen the queen, and you're not her. Claire grabbed the woman's arm, shaking her head frantically. I said kneel, Rose roared. She held out her hand, and the blood hardened in Joanna's feet. slowly reaching her knees. Her body collapsed, falling to her knees before the crowd. She gasped, then screamed in agony. The screaming didn't stop. There are 50 elite bodyguards here. I don't know what kind of trickery you just used, but you won't be doing it again, and you won't be leaving here alive, the governess said. Guards! Kill this woman! No! Wait, you don't understand! Claire shrieked, grabbing the governess's arm. Anyone who would attack the wrong queen is a traitor, and traitors will not be given mercy, Rose shouted, warning the approaching guards. Almost none of them listened. In less than a minute, she was surrounded by so many mercenaries that she couldn't even see the crowd anymore. She'd allowed them to surround her, freezing those closest to her in place to create confusion. What's happening to my body? One man shouted. This is blood magic, another woman said. In an instant, Rose turned each guard's body into a simultaneous, grotesque series of detonating bombs. The aftermath could be mistaken for a red rain, and worse, slowly covering everything. The golden glow of Rose's eyes contrasted her completely red body in truly menacing fashion. If you run before I say so, you will be next. Stay a while and hear my words. Everyone was allowed a speech, after all. Doesn't the queen deserve a few words, too? Rose said, gazing over the crowd. No one dared to move. Claire was on her knees, choking between sobs, trying to speak, but her words only came out as a weak whisper. Mercy, Blood Queen! Mercy, Blood Queen! She repeated. Rose placed her hand beneath her chin, squeezing her face and raising it to meet her gaze. That's more like it. Was that so hard? She said, letting go of her chin and allowing her to continue groveling. Stay that way until I say you can move. Rose turned to the crowd. Heed my words. Anyone who would harm my people, be it foreign invaders, greedy merchants, or corrupt aristocrats, this is the fate that awaits you. The punishment for crimes against Valencia's most vulnerable people would be 1,000-fold the offense. Slavery and other heinous crimes against our people will never be tolerated in Valencia, now or ever. Though it pains me to spare you, I will do so under the necessity that this message must be spread far and wide. Go home and tell your country's leaders. Inform your employer. Tell the corrupt court official you work for. Tell them all that the Blood Queen Rose Valencia is in power now and will go to reclaim her throne. All hail the Blood Queen! The woman shouted, exiting her home near the market. Another man hung out of his window, shaking his fists. Long live our savior, Blood Queen Valencia! Rose smiled, returning to Claire. I will give you an hour's head start. Return to the castle and relay my decree. Vacate the throne room voluntarily, or it will be decorated with their blood. Claire stumbled forward, grabbing Rose's hand and kissing it. Yes, Blood Queen, thank you for sparing me. I'll leave right away. Rose shooed her away without a response. She ran to the nearest horse, galloping out of the town. Rose turned her attention to the few remaining guards who hadn't charged her as ordered and pointed to the cages. Free everyone here, now! She placed her hand on her hips and tapped her foot impatiently. After shaking themselves free of their stupors, the men and women quickly collected the keys and began freeing everyone. One by one, they all lined up in front of the stage. The first man kneeled before her, and the rest followed his lead, until at least every captured man and woman were kneeling. Return home. You are all free, Rose said, waving them away. A few stood up and ran for the gates, but most didn't move from their places. Why do you continue to kneel? Go. I said you were free. Blood Queen, one man said, waiting for permission to continue. Go on, she said. He stood to his feet, clearing his throat and wiping blood from his face. Most of us have nowhere to go. Many of our families sold us out. Contrary to what was said, most of us are criminals in prison for petty crimes against the new regime. You said you intend to take back the throne tonight. Let us fight for you instead. Those you killed no longer need their equipment. Armor and weapons are free for the taking. Rose thought this over, but decided against it. She was all-powerful, after all. She changed her mind about needing the support of the citizens. It was merely a bonus now. She'd walk into the throne room alone, and would make for a much stronger show of her power. Collect all the armor and weapons and protect this town. When the others hear, they may try to reclaim it for the Nefari's purposes. Serve me loyally, and you will be rewarded. Blood Queen, the man shouted, dropping to one knee again, a smile stretched across his face. Leaving the town in the hands of criminals might be risky, but it couldn't be any more worse than those who controlled it until now. I promised my aunt 1 hour, so 1 hour she shall have. In the meantime, let us celebrate together and toast to a new Valencia, reborn in blood. As for the rest of you, you now have my permission to leave. Spread the word as I commanded. Show your face in my Valencia again, and you will find the same fate as the others. The crowd dispersed in chaos and screams, men and women scattering in all directions. Citizens of the town poured from their homes, cheering and clapping loudly. Moments later, they began crowding around the stage, placing gifts at her feet. This power was intoxicating. Okay, that was the end of that chapter. I'm going to take another sip. Hopefully my tea is chilled out a little bit. It's still a little hot, but it's okay. I need the heat in my throat to keep it open. Alright. I'm not even sure what chapter this is, because like I said, the chapter order is kind of messed up. I think it's chapter 7. But anyway. Diana felt a wave of relief wash over her as the rain fell. The woman was burning up. She'd ran and took so many turns, ignoring the pain and blood loss, until she was beyond certain that no one was on her trail, and she could ditch her disguise. She would have changed it instead, only she'd forgotten about the one she'd stashed in the woods and ran right past it. She'd kill higher profile targets, but this might have been the most dangerous one yet, in no small part because of how careless she'd been. Now that she'd stopped to catch her breath, the flow of blood slowed from her arm and her shoulder. She needed to quickly get this patched up and find a change of clothing quickly. Even though the injuries weren't severe, this would mark her. As she neared the road, she could hear a wagon rattling along the road, much faster than it should be going, especially at night. She'd have to take her chances. She stepped out onto the road, waving her arms as it approached. Time for a performance. She tore her clothing and messed up her hair. If she was correct, this person was running from whatever happened in Bellenhurst. The wagon came into sight, loaded up with merchandise they'd likely intended to unload there. She was right. They were fleeing. "Help!" Diana screamed. "Please, help me!" The wagon nearly blew past her, but the driver halted to the horses just a short distance away. She ran to catch up to them. "What are you doing out here, young lady? You're hurt." "I ran from Bellenhurst. I almost didn't make it. My legs are giving out from me after running so hard. I feared traveling the road, so I took to the woods. That's how I got hurt." The man scratched his beard and looked over at his wife. "God help us. You're fortunate you didn't have to witness that massacre. I was there to trade clothing, but feared she'd think I was involved with the slaves, so my wife and I ran as quickly as we could. Fortunately, we could save the merchandise too, but others weren't so lucky. I still don't understand how you made it this far so quickly on foot." "Through the woods. A straight path here from Bellenhurst is much quicker than the winding roads." Diana dropped to her knees, pleading. "Please, she could come this way as we speak." "Stop wasting time. Let her climb in the back." The man's wife snapped, taking charge. She looked at Diana. "Choose an outfit while you're back there and get changed. Don't worry about paying. We don't plan to stay in Valencia for long." Diana climbed in the back and began undressing. "Don't tell me. Let us know if you'd like to drop you off somewhere along the way. But if you're going all the way to the capital with us, I suggest you grab what you need and make a neighboring town. Better yet, cross the border." She nudged her husband and the wagon was on the move again. It was slow moving, but it would make it in plenty of time. "Drop me off at the Raincoat Retreat, just outside the city. I have a friend who works there. I need to warn them," Diana lied. "What happened in Bellenhurst after I left?" "We weren't in the crowd for the slave auction. We could only see it from pretty far back, but the screaming and the blood, it was like a red rain over the crowd, the screams." The man sped up and his wife nudged him again. "Then slow down, you fool. Do you want the wagon to fall apart? Then how do you expect us to get to the capital? Get your head on straight." He nodded, slowing the wagon again. The rest of the ride was quiet on the way to Raincoat Retreat. She had to thank her good fortune for getting her there alive. After losing her horse, getting injured, and failing to retrieve her next disguise, she wondered what her teachers would say if they knew she messed up this badly. Not that her treasonous actions would get her executed anyway. Treason was a funny word. It meant something completely different to different people and changed depending on the day of the week. She didn't go inside the inn, instead sitting at a table outside so she could watch the road. A rain of blood, huh? She was expecting a very public execution, but not that much of a show. Maybe she ran into trouble, same as her. She had a bad feeling. Nearly an hour later, a horse walked down the road. Rose didn't even look at her and continued toward the Capitol. "Are you all right?" Diana shouted after her. Rose turned toward her, raising her hand, her eyes glowing. Diana froze in place, then took a step back. "Rose?" Rose's eyes dimmed a little. "Diana? Sorry, you look a little different. I almost didn't recognize you. Get on. We're going to the castle. I'm tired of wasting time." This is exactly what Diana had feared. She considered killing someone she didn't know just standing in the rain, with no genuine cause, and she hadn't even realized her body moved to do it. She wasn't even interested in discussing their plan anymore. Maybe she was powerful enough to take back the castle by herself, but she couldn't shake the feeling this would not end well. "Yeah, well, I had to take what I could get. You don't like it?" she asked as she struggled to mount the horse. "You'd look good in anything," Rose said, helping her on. "Oh, Rose," Diana whispered, mostly to herself. Why was she feeling so guilty now? Wasn't this one of the likely outcomes she'd already accepted? What changed? "What was that?" Rose asked. "Shouldn't we wait to take the throne?" "I've decided that won't be necessary." Rose continued riding slowly. The streets were empty. She'd expected them to throw everything they had at the Blood Queen. Had they evacuated everyone? Had they already given up? "Everyone's gone," Diana said. Rose giggled. "Well, I did warn them to evacuate the throne room. I suppose they cleared a path for me, too." As they neared the castle, a man ran out, but stopped when he saw them. Rose raised her hand, but Diana grabbed her wrist. "Wait! You there! What's going on inside the castle? Is everyone gone? Please don't kill me." He already noticed Rose's eyes. "Answer her question quickly," Rose said. "There's only 3 people left in the castle. 3 in the throne room, the Queen, her chief advisor, and her new bodyguard. Please let me go." Rose hesitated, prompting Diana to squeeze her wrist again. "There's no reason to delay," she said. "Why not let him go?" Rose nodded, and the two dismounted the horse as the man ran away in fear. They walked through the quiet castle, their steps creating an echo that Rose had never heard before. Normally it was so crowded and busy, with servants running around and much business being conducted through its halls. "I don't like this," Diana said. "This trap has written all over it. This has trap written all over it. We should delay and wait for them to drop their guard when they believe all this is all behind them." "I'm sorry. Am I the Queen or are you?" Rose said, her eyes becoming brighter. "Rose, I'm worried about you. You aren't yourself." "I'm more myself than ever before. Besides, aren't we doing exactly what you wanted? I was going to leave, remember? You stopped me. Well, now I'm here, after taking your excellent advice. I'm taking my throne back. Even if our entire army stood against me, nothing would change that. Certainly not a single bodyguard. I have you, after all. Aren't you my bodyguard?" Diana made one last attempt. "Your actions in Bellenhurst came as a surprise. It was an ambush. It's the opposite here. What if the bodyguard is a foreign mage with magic we haven't prepared for? Even if it's the Witch of Arthurus, I could drain her body dry before her flame could flicker. No mage can stand against me. All mages fear blood magic. I will remind them why." Diana nodded. This was her fault. She drew her daggers and stood beside Rose. "Then let's go. No matter what, I'll stay by your side. Let's take back the throne." Rose pushed open the giant doors leading into the throne room. There really were only 3 of them. Diana's uncle, Rose's sister, and a large, bearded warrior. A foreigner, for certain. His sword must weigh a ton. Diana would have no problem dealing with him if it came to it. "Rose!" Oline shouted, jumping to her feet. "You're alive!" It was easy for Diana to recognize the joy on her face, but it was as though Rose was blind to it, or simply no one cared. "That's my throne you're sitting on," Rose said, raising her hand. "Rose, wait!" It was too late. The flicker of the glow in her eye gave away the surging magical power. An attack was imminent. She was going to kill her sister. In a flash, the giant man stepped between them, drew his sword, and swung it, seemingly at thin air. Rose screamed out, blood draining from mysterious holes appearing all over her body. At first, her scream was one of pain, but the one that followed was completely different. "Oline! I'm sorry. I don't know why. I love you, sister. I don't understand. I never wanted to. I never meant to." She trembled, collapsing to her knees. "Diana, do it. I can't control it after all." "What? No," Diana said, putting herself between them. "You promised me," Rose said, sobbing into her hands. "You gave me your word." "No," she repeated as the man approached her. "You were worth every gold bar, Blaingrave, to take down a blood mage in a single strike that never even touched her, beyond belief." The voice of Count William Blackwell, her uncle, burned in her ears. One step ahead, as always. Nothing was beneath him. If she could accomplish nothing else here, it would be to bury her dagger in his heart after dealing with Blaingrave, of all people. She just needed to take a deep breath. He was big, strong, but also slow. She dodged that first strike and slit his throat with a counter. Simple as that. The first strike came, and she focused all her athletic ability and training on that single dodge. She'd succeeded. The swing fell a hair short, and now he was wide open. She brought her dagger straight on, as swiftly as she could, toward his throat. His strike stopped dead in the middle of the swing, coming back in the other direction. He didn't even switch his grip, yet somehow the strike was totally different. The hilt of the sword slammed into her stomach with a force that lifted her off the ground. She gasped, unable to do anything else. She could barely see. No man should be that fast. At least, no one that looked like a giant brute the way he did. He grabbed her by the throat, picking her up. She dropped her dagger, gripping his wrist, trying to twist it away. His strength was so unreal. She may as well have been trapped in iron. It was no use. He picked up Rose with his other hand, holding them both up with ease. "Put them down, Blaine. They need to be captured and executed publicly. Otherwise, the people will never believe we killed them," Count Blackwell said. "Sorry, but I'm not taking any chances," Blaine replied, walking over to an open window, holding them both out of it. They dangled helplessly over the river below. Rose could have done something, but the fight was gone from her eyes. They no longer even glowed. "Blaingrave, I am ordering you to return them. You work for me." Blaine suddenly leaned close, whispering in Diana's ear. "Hold on to her tightly when you fall. Meet me down at the river. There's a camp and someone who will help you out of the water. I'll be there just before the light of dawn." Diana couldn't respond. He was still choking her. She was barely conscious. Her thinking wasn't clear enough to piece everything together. He dropped them, and she wrapped her arms tightly around Rose before they hit the water. That's the end of that chapter. So, Blaine finally shows up, almost halfway through the book. Again, if you're liking the story and would like to read it for yourself, it's in the pinned comments, and you can easily find the other stories in this series. He operates on wizard timing, as well as other books by Mr. Bograth. He basically has a little bit of everything. High fantasy, sci-fi, post-apocalyptic, all the good stuff. Rose felt Diana's arms wrap around her as they crashed into the river below. She could see the man leaning out of the window from above, watching them for a moment before disappearing back inside. This river was so full of rocks that it was truly a miracle they survived the fall. Or was it? The two held on to one another, struggling to keep enough air in their lungs and enough water out. Not far out of sight of the castle, the river slowed. They could easily stay afloat without being dragged under. "Well, I'll be," a man's voice said. "Ha! We're gonna be rich," another man added. Rose struggled to make them out with eyes full of water. "Oh, thank you for following, Romeo! Thank you for following!" But she could only assume that they were sent to capture them. The last thing she wanted was to be hasty. They wanted to capture, not killed. There would be an opportunity to attack them and escape once she knew for sure. And Diana got her footing and held Rose close to her, reaching for her second dagger, but finding nothing. She must have lost it in the river. Whoa, take it easy. We don't mean you any harm. You must be cold. Let's get you out of the river. Rose nodded to Diana and they relaxed. Both men took their arms and guided them out of the river, which was more difficult than she had expected. They continued walking just a short distance to camp that had been set up near to the river. Sorry, he asked us not to make a fire, but we have blankets for you. We'll be leaving soon and you can get out of those wet clothes. All we have are men's clothing, so you'll have to settle on those for the time being. Wait, Diana said, stopping the men before they could leave. Who asked you not to make a fire? Why is this camp here? The older of the two men scratched his beard and laughed. Blaingrave. I doubt you've met him. Big foreigner with a beard like mine. Was staying with me and my son when he first came to Valencia. One day, he offered us a bucket of gold if we watched this river and helped anyone that might need rescue. Said to leave camp and go home if anyone showed up. We're fishermen, so we know the water well. We're skilled at rescue and know how to set up a proper camp. Rose kept her lips sealed, leaving the conversation to Diana. Everything she had in her mind would only confuse the poor man and delay them from leaving. Blaingrave. No, never met him, but I've heard of him. Lots of people know who he is these days. Be sure to thank him for us next time you see him, Diana said. We'll be heading home soon then. Good luck to both of you. Diana nodded, watching the two as they left, while sitting next to Rose on a log. They were in a hurry and clearly excited about their coming fortune. Rose grabbed Diana, turning her so they faced one another. Tell me why, she demanded. I guess people don't ask too many questions when gold's on the line, Diana replied, shrugging. No! I mean, why didn't you kill me? You promised me. I nearly killed my own sister. I almost gave in to the power completely, and I didn't even realize it. I thought I was in control. What if I do it again? You need to find a knife. I'm sure they left one here. You need to kill me before the power regains control of my mind. I'm sorry. I can't keep that promise, Diana said, hanging her head. Why not? Fine, I'll do it myself, she said, attempting to stand before Diana pulled her back down. Because you're the one person I can't bring myself to kill. This is all my fault. I tried to use you to get revenge on my uncle. The thought of you killing your sister didn't bother me at all. I was so angry about what happened to my father. But after spending time with you, I've come to have feelings for you. When the time came, I couldn't bring myself to do it. But that's not the only reason I didn't do it. I also believe that you can control it. You've never used the power before the way you did in Valenhurst. Now that you have, you know what to expect. You can do this. I know you can. Rose brushed her hair out of her eyes. I don't mind that you used me. I can't blame you for how you felt. I know by how easily you killed those assassins that you've been through a lot. You've been forced to do awful things because of the failures of those who came before me. And me. If you believe in me, if you really think I can do this, I want to make sure you never have to kill anyone again. I want a Valencia where no one has to worry about becoming a slave or having to kill on behalf of aristocrats. I made my own decisions up to now. You weren't to blame. Diana leaned over, pressing her lips to Rose's, wrapping her hands around her lower back and pulling her close. You know, it's still quite a while before daybreak, she whispered as she nibbled gently on her ear. Rose shivered and needed a moment to compose herself. Even though she was inexperienced, she wanted this. It wasn't her power surging, driving her to act the way it did when they kissed in the cave. It was deeper than that. This woman meant so much for her. Her heart had never burned for another human the way it did for Diana. She ran her hands along Diana's back, carefully untying the string that kept the dress on her shoulders. We should really do something about these wet clothes. Here, let me help you with that, Rose said, smiling. What kind of bodyguard would I be if I let Valencia's queen catch a cold? I should take the role more seriously. Allow me to remedy that by getting you out of your own wet clothes, Diana said, kissing her neck. I want you to call me Rose, even if I become queen again, she said, hugging Diana tightly. If it'll help you undress quicker, I'll call you whatever you'd like me to, Diana said, giggling before kissing her lips again, moving down to her neck. Do it yourself, Rose said. Not a problem. Hours later, Blaine approached the camp, stopping when he noticed the two women cuddled up beneath the blanket, covered by the blanket and apparently nothing else. He cleared his throat. Started awake, Rose's eyes glowed brightly, cutting through the dim morning. Diana pulled a knife from beneath her pillow. Blaine held up his hands and took a step back. "Put something on. We have a lot to talk about," he said. The two quickly dressed. Rose was so embarrassed she thought her face might be stuck blushing for the rest of her life, while Diana appeared completely unbothered by it. "You can turn around now," Diana said, sitting next to Rose on the same log again. He sat across from them, taking a deep breath and letting out a sigh. Word has spread that a blood mage had attempted to assassinate the queen, but in their haste they made a mistake. One lie too many. They claimed not to know the identity of the blood mage. They sent soldiers to Valenhurst to silence your only small pocket of supporters, but they were pushed back by a spontaneous ragtag of supporters. Militia that formed overnight. That has created many problems for those currently controlling the throne. Word spreads quickly when soldiers march. Now whispers are making their way through every tavern across the kingdom. There is unrest, but hope, and when these two things are present, you get... Uprising, Rose said, finishing his sentence. Blaine nodded. Exactly. "Oh, and I really want to know how you did it," Rose said. "Did what?" "Turned my power against me. I gambled my life on something I wasn't sure would work. I was taught a sword technique to deflect magic. Of course, it's much easier to use against magic you can see, but I learned that with timing, I could use it against unseen magic as well. Even though you may not realize it, your magic flows from your body and into the body of your target. It passes from you to them, though briefly. I can change the path. I didn't intend to use it against you. I had no idea that would happen, but I'd hoped it would just dissipate. It's dangerous to send blood magic in all different directions like that, and I hope to never do it again." Rose nodded. She understood, a little. "You may be one of the few people who can kill me if my powers overwhelm me and run wild again. Can I count on you to do so?" Diana shot Blaine a glare that conveyed the message clearly. "You had better not answer that question." "Okay, so if you're really not working for the False Queen, then why did you stop us from taking the throne?" Diana asked, interjecting quickly. "Is that what you think I did?" Blaine asked, as though the real reason should be obvious. "You were protecting Oline," Rose said. "I can never thank you enough for that." "Oline, and then you. Your sister is innocent. She was forced to sit on the throne at the threat of losing her life, and worse. She was told you were dead. I expected someone made an attempt on her life, believing she was to blame for their hardships. The person who is actually pulling the strings is Count William Blackwell," Diana said. "You two catch on fast, but it's only partially true. There was an Estonian spy master behind almost all the conflict in the kingdoms surrounding Estonia." "Was?" Rose asked, tilting her head. "He's been dealt with, but that's done little to stop the wheels he already set in motion. With the promise of Estonian gold now called into question, Count Blackwell is looking to create his own source of wealth and power. His initial plan was to become the exclusive source of slaves in this region of the continent, since the trade was recently abolished in Belmar." "Our queen took care of that," Diana said, putting an arm around Rose. Rose only frowned, clearly not proud of what she'd done there. Blaine sighed, placing his hand on his sword. "It's never a good feeling hurting or killing others, especially if it isn't a life you chose. You didn't choose to be a princess, and you certainly didn't choose to be a blood mage. I've traveled through many kingdoms on the continent, and I've met mages of all kinds. The witch in Myria and Arthurus went through similar challenges with her own power. Her powers nearly ran wild, though her cause for using it was a justified one. It's much the same for you, though reading my blood magic may be even worse. In times past, there were hundreds of witches who helped one another and learned to control their power as a community. Not so for blood mages. There is always only one at a time, and decades or more pass between them. You walk a lonely path, Rose. When this is all over, I suggest you ask help from Myria, if nothing else to give you ideas. I can see that you're a good person. If it's any comfort, I truly believe that you can control it." Diana smiled, squeezing Rose's hand. "See, I'm not the only one who believes it. Blaine's traveled so many places and met so many mages. Even I've heard of his exploits. If he believes it, you should as well." Rose returned a smile, then looked at Blaine. "I thank you for your kind words, Blaine. I wasn't aware the witches had similar struggles with their powers, but I will seek her advice when all this is over. However, seeing the things I've seen these past few days, I know I must become queen for my people's sake. There is no other option anymore. I've incited this rebellion through my actions, and I cannot abandon my people to be slaughtered by the very soldiers who should protect them. Coming to their aid will be my priority." Blaine nodded, rising to his feet with a broad smile. "I'll be the first to admit that I've never had much love for monarchs, but I will aid you. Your sister may not be safe, but I can no longer protect her myself. I was relieved of my role as bodyguard for tossing your supposedly lifeless bodies into the river, both because they see me as a liability, and because they, thankfully, believe you two are dead and no longer pose a threat. When Valenhurst is secure, we will see directly to rescuing my sister," Rose said, finally feeling like a real queen, delivering decisive orders. "With her support, even more will rise against the corrupt officials holding the throne hostage. It could create a long, bloody war," Diana said. "No, it won't," Blaine said, nodding to Rose, "because the display of indomitable power takes the will to fight from an enemy faster than any army ever could. When you find an opportunity to display such power, you must take it, and you must be convincing. Valencia's arrogant puppet masters need something to convince them to keep them up at night. They aren't warriors, and their courage only goes so far as the people willing to stand between them and their enemy. Remove that barrier. If nothing stands between them and a terrible blood mage, they will give in without another drop of blood spilled. Whether their own must be spilled after that happens is a decision for a monarch to make, one I do not envy." "Shall we depart?" Rose asked, looking between the two of them. "One more thing," Blaine said. "I wouldn't recommend using your full power again until the opportunity to make your best display arises. If you lose control again, it may cause the people to fear you. Use restraint. Only call upon what's needed to win the battle, and not a sliver more." Diana nodded in agreement. "He's right. It will probably save more lives in the long run." "I will think about it," Rose said. "Let's waste no more time. To Valenhurst." The end of that chapter. A little bit more than halfway through the book. My tea is finally at the right temperature. I mean, it already mostly was, but it only was really too hot the first sip. Alright, next chapter. She couldn't believe this was the same Valenhurst from the day before. Despite all the blood that flowed through the market, it was much worse now. Injured and dead littered the streets. Many bore the royal army's regalia, while the others wore ill-fitting armor stolen from the dead mercenaries hired by the slavers. They'd held back a unit of royal soldiers. With only this? "The queen has returned!" a voice shouted, running to meet them. "Blood Queen," the man said, dropping to one knee. It was the same man who had spoken to her after freeing the slaves, who insisted on staying. "Tell me, who leads these men and women to defend Valenhurst?" Rose asked. "It was I, your majesty." Rose, Blaine, and Diana all looked at one another. Something wasn't added up. "I see very many unfamiliar faces," Rose said. "I beg your forgiveness for acting on my own. After you departed, we left the town and raided the prison nearby where an execution was taking place. An ambush, and the last thing they were ever expecting. I knew about it because I was one of the criminals to be executed if I hadn't been sold off by the warden instead. We rescued everyone at the noose and freed every prisoner in the building. Some made a run for it, but more than half joined up with us. Many were those who stood against the slavers and were happy to fight. With the barracks nearby, supplies and armaments were easy to get." Blaine nodded enthusiastically, trying and failing to restrain a smile. "What is your name, and what was your crime?" Rose asked. "Johann Black, your majesty. My crime was the murder of a tax collector and of the first bounty hunter who tried to arrest me. I suppose you could add a dozen or more royal soldiers to that list now. I lost count." "Captain Black, you are to gather your unit and prepare for a second wave that will come soon. My friends and I will assist you with this battle." "Captain," the man asked, his eyes wide, "but I'm a criminal, and a rebel no less." He certainly did not look the part of an officer. It had been who knows how many days since he'd washed, and he was covered in blood and mud. His curly black hair, streaked with gray, stuck to his face. His baggy armor, fitting with loose and broken straps, hung unevenly off his body. "You are not a rebel," Rose scolded. "You serve the true Queen of Valencia, while others have stood with the puppet ruler and her nefarious puppeteers. Take us to the wounded, and I don't want to hear one more word of argument." Diana grinned. Captain Black stood, saluted, and nodded to one man nearby. "Stable the horses. I'm taking our queen to the wounded." The man simply nodded, a grin on his face. "Aye, Captain." Captain Black kicked dirt at the man and shooed him away after he collected 3 horses. "These men are going to tease me relentlessly, but that's all right. I'm going to take time to get used to it, but I'm proud to serve a queen that cares for her people in any way I can. By the way, I remember the young woman with you before, but who is the big guy?" he asked, walking in front of them. "The woman you remember is Diana, my bodyguard. The man I brought with me is the hero Blaine Grave." Captain Black stopped mid-set and twisted his neck around so quickly it might have snapped right off his shoulders. "What? The Blaine Grave?" Blaine shrugged. "Hopefully you've heard more good than bad. A few things might even be true." Captain Black grinned as though he'd just met a character from a story he'd previously thought fictional. "I've heard plenty of both, truth be told, and impressed by all of it. Though I've heard you were 8 feet tall, as wide as a mountain, and as strong as one of the stone giants up north. I've also heard you like to cause trouble for the monarchs. We certainly need that here. I hope that one's true, at least." Blaine placed his hand on his sword and stood quietly for a moment. "That depends on the monarch. I guess I'm just not all that obedient, and that's upsetting for some. The problem in this queendom isn't the monarch, but those pulling the strings. I think someone was already looking for those string pullers because Gloria Wessel was assassinated yesterday at her manor. Maybe if we could figure out who it was, we can exchange notes, assuming they didn't kill her or shut her up." Diana spoke up. "Yeah, well, that person didn't exactly have an opportunity to go rummaging through the ledgers, since she barely escaped with her life. Believe it or not, Madame Wessel keeps a tight guard. Well, kept." Captain Black turned around and completely faced them, now mouth open wide. "That was you? You've got guts, Diana. You couldn't pay me enough to go in a place like that alone with any hope of coming out alive. It's disappointing to hear that you didn't have a chance to look for evidence of collaborators." Blaine raised his hand. "Don't forget, I was hired by Count Blackwell to protect the Queen. I saw a little of how they work, and I can tell you Gloria Wessel insisted on a strict no-record policy. She was never written on a schedule, never announced, and never kept records of her communications with the Queen advisors." "Not good," Captain Black said, shaking his head. "On the contrary, it's not all bad. Think about how nervous they'll be knowing someone got to her anyway. Besides, I know of one collaborator on the plot to sabotage Rose's coronation. Gloria Wessel is not involved in that, at least that I'm aware of." "And when were you going to spill this information, Blaine?" Diana asked, putting a hand on her hip. "When we had something less important to do than saving an entire town, perhaps. And don't even think about it. He's a wind mage from Estonia, and he's out of your league. They've been writing to one another, but I heard he just showed up in person. Our best strategy is to avoid him. Out of your league, maybe. Not mine. Everyone dies the same when caught by surprise. Do you think you could have bested Rose otherwise? I lost to you in a toe-to-toe battle, but everyone sleeps." "And the dead do it the most, Diana. Are you eager to join them? One mistake and you'll have no chance of winning. Lots of people in Estonia manifest wind magic, but they vary in ability." "This is just another example of how you and I look at things differently with killing. You're a giant, powerful man with experience and training. I'm smaller and weaker. When I kill, it's more about strategy and tactics." Rose took a deep breath, her eyes darting back and forth between the two. Captain Black turned his back, as though to make sure that no one would ask his opinion on the matter. "That's a fair point. They'll be expecting me, if anyone, because of my history with Estonia," Blaine said. "Bounty hunters," Captain Black said, seeing an opportunity to rejoin the conversation usefully. "I think so," Blaine said. "That's an impressive bounty they have on you, Mr. Grave. You must have really upset some purple shirts. I killed a government official, and they didn't put one nearly that big on me." "You just didn't go up the ranks far enough," Blaine said with a heavy sigh. Rose was curious to hear more about this business in Estonia. But it seemed rude to press Blaine further, since he was volunteering to help them and asking nothing in return. She already knew all she needed to know about Estonia anyway. They were meddling in her queendom and treating Valencia like a piece in their... No, don't fight the book, Sonny. Sonny. He's trying to get my attention by biting the book. Luckily, he didn't do any damage. She already knew all she needed to know about Estonia anyway. They were meddling in her queendom and treating Valencia like a piece on their chessboard. This would not stand. Take care of that wind mage, Diana. If you believe you can do it, then do so. If they think they can harm our people just because we don't have a population of mages and because we don't match their country's wealth, they will learn differently. You'll be ordering a replacement anyway, that's true. They'll learn that no one steps on this country intending to harm our people or our guests and leaves alive. Blaine tilted his head, narrowing his eyes at Rose. If she ends up in a confrontation with the Wind Mage, she's dead. Any other assassination is she could run or fight her way out. One small error and she's finished. Avoid the Wind Mage or we'll deal with him together later. We have more important things to deal with here. My nose. Ever since Sunny came in, I feel like I got cat hair all over my nose. Okay. What do you think, Captain? Rose asked. The man had showed excellent tactical thinking. Me? Oh, be blunt, Captain. I asked for your opinion, Rose said, trying to reassure him. He stood up straight and glanced between them. If Blaine's right, and they're here mostly for him, it won't do Valencia much good going forward if they always see Blaine as the sole threat. If they're blindsided by someone else, it will take them down a notch. However, what Blaine said can't be discounted either. It's risky. Maybe too risky for the benefit. Unfortunately, it's this kind of tough decision that always burdens a proper leader. I'm sorry. Blaine nodded in agreement. No need to apologize, Captain. I'm accepting that reality even if previous queens chose not to. All right. My decision stands. My order is for Diana to assassinate the Wind Mage diplomat. I have complete faith in her assessment of her own ability. I'd ask that you do the same, Blaine. Her ability isn't what I'm concerned about, Blaine said, frowning. Diana laughed. It finally clicked. Blaine here just has a big heart, that's all, Diana said, grinning. Tell you what, I'll be extra careful. If I don't find an obvious opening, I'll abort and get out of there. You have a big heart too, even if you don't realize, Blaine said. Diana was stunned and wasn't sure how to respond. Was he right? Was she really changing that much? They're going to be angry in losing Bellenhurst twice, and they're going to throw everything they have at it. All of you should be careful too. Don't push yourself too hard, Rose. Rose smiled, taking her hand. I'll see you soon. Diana grabbed Rose by the hair and shoved their lips together. Captain Black turned his back again, pretending he didn't see anything. Blaine seemed unaffected, as though he'd seen this sort of thing many times before, as unlikely as that was. See you soon, Rose. And the end of that chapter. Getting a couple sips of my tea here. For whatever reason, I guess I'm still like a little bit congested from the last time I was sick. Or maybe it's just like the change in the seasons is happening. Alright. As Diana neared the castle, she couldn't help but notice how normal everything seemed. At a glance, or to an unfamiliar visitor, it might appear as though nothing was wrong at all. There was no movement of soldiers in the streets beyond typical patrols. The market was busy, and the streets were bustling. Not just normal, but better than normal. Those inside the castle walls would be the closest to royal propaganda, and isolated from news coming from other towns. They were celebrating. The Blood Queen, so far as they knew, was dead. Lucky for her, she was dead too. Being Den made it a lot easier to move around. Her simple disguise would be all she needed, and little good that would do her. She'd have to sneak through, exchange a few words as possible, and move on to her target and their most vulnerable. She thought a lot about Blaine's words. One slip and she'd be dead. There would be no conversations with this target. She wouldn't try to get any information. Just one moment for a clean kill. Knife in, knife out, leave. Since the servant strategy worked so well before and wasn't compromised, she'd put that one to use again. She knew the behaviors of the servants here well, knew their typical day, how they spoke to one another, their quarters, and most importantly, how little they cared about an unfamiliar face. It was the pivotal part of a good plan and a bit of poetic justice. Slipping into the stables and inside the castle proper, she made her way to the laundry room filled with giant metal tubs. The men here worked hard, especially, and with few breaks. They seldom even looked up when you spoke to them, probably because they were rarely spoken to with any sort of respect. Hey, when the laundry's going to be done for the Estonian diplomat? He's sick of waiting, she said, putting her hand on her hip and tapping her toe on the stone floor. One man looked up and furrowed his brow. It was done at least an hour ago. They just finished drawing a bath. I swear if they lost his clothes between here and there, I'm going to... Oh, take it down a notch, tough guy. You know the servants that take up the laundry can't tell from up from down. They probably got it mixed up. I'll check. Actually, before I go, how is it you pronounce the guy's name again? The Estonian in the bath, I mean. Maybe you're the one who can't tell up from down. Their names aren't that hard to pronounce. Roland Merrick. And he's not even a diplomat, so you better be careful calling him that. He's a personal guest of Lord Blackwell. You'd think he was the king of Estonia the way he keeps bothering us to treat him like one. Showed up a couple days ago about asking about the Queen's bodyguard, only for the guy to run off before they can meet. Serves them right. Roland Merrick. No title, at least not one used often enough for servants to remember. A personal guest of Lord Blackwell. Unfortunately, she knew her uncle well enough to know the sort of things he might do for personal guests he needed to impress. Most powerful men shared only a few common weaknesses, all of which could be exploited. Wealth, power, fame, and of course, women. Fortunately for her, she had the right tools for the job. Is he still in the 4th guest room? Diana asked. No. Did they move him? That explained why the clothing might have been lost. I told them 3 times. He's in the 2nd royal guest room. Those women are going to get us flogged. Well, I'm sure they'd enjoy that, vindictive little. If you can move your mouth, you can move your fingers, Diana snapped, sounding as authentic as possible as she turned on her heels and left. A tray sat on a table in the hallway, holding what looked like a half-empty teapot, 2 cups. She picked it up and continued walking. Several other servants passed by her, but no one paid her any mind. When she reached the 2nd guest room, she considered her options. She'd originally planned to ambush him, but that would be difficult if the only practical way to enter the room was through the door. She could knock, but that would likely be turned away if he was taking a bath. She stood there for a moment and took a deep breath. No, this wasn't the most tactful of plans, but nothing about killing someone ever was. A dirty job, no matter how you sliced it. Not the first time she'd done things this way, after all. She opened the door as quietly as possible, stepping inside while holding the tray, closing it and locking it behind her. The last thing she wanted was to be interrupted. Who's there? Thought I clarified I wasn't to be disturbed. Lord Merrick? I know you asked not to be disturbed, but Lord Blackwell insisted on this surprise gift. He was certain that you would like it. Shall I leave? She asked, making her voice sound as sweet as honey. Come in here, I'll see what you have, he said, after a brief pause. Diana put the tray on the floor and walked into the bathroom, finding a very naked Estonian man sitting in a hot bath. His hand was already raised, ready to rip her apart with wind at the slightest hint of a threat. He looked her up and down, narrowing his eyes. Well, you don't seem to have anything in your hands. This is a trick? Diana grinned and untied the back of her dress, letting it fall to the floor. That's because the surprise is me, my lord. Good. He didn't notice the knife falling with it, nor had he noticed when she kicked it. His eyes were exactly where she'd expected them to be. You have my attention. Why don't you climb in the tub and enjoy the water? Diana giggled, stepping around behind him and wrapping her arms around his shoulders, pressing herself against him. I'm not sure what you're accustomed to in Estonia, but we believe in savoring things here, taking it slowly, building up to the right moments. She swirled her finger on his chest and exhaled a shallow breath on his ear. Very well, show me how a Valencian woman does things. Diana ran her fingers through his hair, sliding it down his back and kissing his neck. Are you sure you want to know? I can go easy on if you prefer. Things can sometimes get a bit violent. He laughed, slouching in the tub and closing his eyes. Believe me, I can handle you. If you say so, my lord. Diana held the dagger above her head and quickly plunged it deep into the man's neck. She held her left hand over his mouth as he tried to scream out. He was able to release some of his wind magic, shattering the tub and releasing the water on the floor, sending both rolling through the shards. He nearly pulled her hand away from his mouth, but the fight left him quickly as his blood. She fumbled to put on her soggy dress and secure the knife. She looked around, then ran between the rooms, looking for another potential way out. There wasn't one. It would be an oversight to offer opportunities for someone to sneak in or out of a royal guest room, but it was worth checking. With the amount of noise the shattering tub made, surely someone would check. Fine. If it came to that, she'd simply knock them out and make a run for it. It's not like any of the servants knew how to fight. One or two royal guards can never chase her down in heavy armor. Once outside, she can make for the woods and vanish completely. She could do this. She had to do this. Making a run for the door, she was met with an explosion. Shards of wood flew by her. Luckily, most of them missed, except for the one that buried itself deep in her left leg. A man stepped inside and she wasted no time in charging him. A second wind mage. She had one chance to take him out. With the flick of his hand, a burst of air sent her flying into the wall behind her, taking her breath away. Two royal guards ran in behind him and he held up his hand. No need to arrest this woman. Arrange a quiet place where we won't be disturbed for a while. An assassin of this skill doesn't act on their own. She and I need to have a little chat. Diana rolled to her feet. She was trying to ignore pain and overcome attacks that stunned. She could go for him again, this time catch him off guard. Before she could make it to her feet, a gust hit her again, sending her on the wall even harder. Broken pieces fell to the floor and onto her body. This was it. She wasn't going to make it. I'm sorry, Rose. All right, that's the end of that chapter. I really like the cover for this one in particular. I'm a sucker for ladies sitting on thrones, though. So. Oh. My hair keeps flying in my face. It's annoying. So annoying. Alright. Next chapter. We're almost done. Rose closed her hands and took a seat in a chair that had been offered to her. Captain Black pulled one up and sat across. There's nearly 100 men you'd closed wounds for. Are you sure you're not a holy maiden? Not even close, she said. But I thank you for the compliment anyway. What is the holy maiden's power like, Blaine? Blaine looked up, startled from whatever daydream he'd been lost in. Oh, she's wonderful. She can heal any wound. Even if you lost an arm, she could regenerate it. If you aren't completely dead, she can bring you back to perfect health in seconds. She could do this to herself, too. Sounds almost like a necromancer, Captain Black said. Just maybe less evil. Blaine glared at the captain. Like blood mages? Like how I'm 8 feet tall? Be careful of what you assume. Nethelos is a big continent. There's plenty of world beyond the seas. The more I learn, the more I realize how little I know. Captain Black held up his hands. Easy, big guy. Stupid humor on my part. I take it you knew necromancers too? Both good and evil, just like all of us. Just like blood mages, Blaine said, nodding to Rose. Even rules have exceptions. Both of you are far too kind to me, Rose said, waving her hand as if to swat away their compliments. Not to outdo the famous Blaine Grave, but I have some additional good news to offer. Should arrive any moment if the two of you would be so kind, Captain Black said, motioning for them to follow. A short distance away, in the market square, several hundred men stood waiting. A smiling old man approached the three of them, though he certainly didn't look like a soldier. Got a few hundred recruits on short notice. Most of the farmers around the city were happy to join, as well as their sons. A few mothers and daughters, too. This is Valencia, after all. Good work, Horace. That brings us to about 500 strong, counting the wounded who are in good enough shape to rejoin for the next fight, Captain Black said. Blaine frowned, but said nothing, though Rose noticed. Everyone here is a genuine hero of Valencia, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. After a moment of awkward silence, Captain Black cleared his throat. Thank you, Your Majesty, most said, though no one spoke together, and everyone spoke in different volumes. Some said something completely different. In that one moment, Rose really accepted it. These weren't soldiers at all. They were farmers, laborers, fathers, husbands, sons, brothers, mothers, wives, daughters, sisters, and brothers. Who was she kidding? She saw quite a few grandfathers in there, too. Count Blackwell was likely furious, and they'd be under pressure to obliterate the enemy in a decisive victory, to eliminate what remained of the Blood Queen annoyance. She wouldn't be surprised if they sent 1,000 soldiers to deal with the 500 here. Many wounded, barely able to stand without help. Others with nothing resembling a proper weapon or armor, sporting pitchforks and shovels. Yet, she meant every word she said. Even more, they really were heroes of Valencia. It's one thing to march against a smaller, weaker army, but to knowingly stand against trained knights with superior numbers and wielding only a shovel? What could drive someone to do that, if not true courage? Desperation, perhaps. All right, you lot, let's get you outfitted with whatever sharpened piece of steel we can find and get ready for whatever comes our way. Blaine nodded, then walked away, motioning for Rose to follow him. He spoke in nearly a whisper. You're no fool. You've realized it too, right? Rose nodded. And you're about to tell me I still shouldn't use my powers, right? Blaine sighed, shaking his head. I'm not the man to tell you to do anything. You're the queen, after all. Even if you weren't, I wouldn't. But you've seen what happens when you use too much, and Diana isn't here to help you come back from it. All I ask for you to think it over. You and I should watch from the guard tower. It will be several hours until whatever awaits us finally arrives. Without another word, the two of them climbed up the ladder to the tower, took a seat, and waited. Rose initially thought the hours would feel like years, but they quickly went by. Just as her few hours of talking with Diana wouldn't completely change their relationship, Blaine felt more like an old friend. She listened to his stories about the Holy Maiden, the witch Maria's role in changing the leadership in Arthurus, and about his friendship with the kind-hearted necromancer and her familiar, and even the mysterious swordmaster who taught them the technique he used to stop her. Even his most recent adventure in Estania involving a rare female wind mage and the noblewoman engaged to their spy master. All shared one very peculiar thing in common. Blaine, do you mind if I ask you something somewhat personal? He nodded, waiting patiently for the question. You know that Diana and I have feelings for one another, right? I thought you were going to ask me the personal question. But yes, you might say I could guess that from the compromising position I found the two of you in at camp. Rose blushed, hiding her face. She'd forgotten about that and wished he hadn't reminded her. Anyway, all the women in your stories were lovers. Don't you find that strange? The witch and the holy maiden, the necromancer and her familiar, that swordmaster and the archer, the female wind mage and the noblewoman. That can't be a coincidence. Blaine shrugged. I guess I haven't really thought that much about it. They're among the finest of friends I've made in my life, and I've learned a lot from all of them. It doesn't matter to me they're women or what their preference for partners is. Rose smiled. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're here, she said. Glad to be. Before he could finish the sentence, they were interrupted by the sound of drum beats. A couple minutes later, the roar of marching feet followed. As they came into sight, they just kept coming. A sea of men as far as the eye could see. The land was flat near Vellenhurst, and you could see for miles from the tower. There must be at least 2,000, Blaine said. Rose couldn't respond. She knew it was possible, but seeing it play out made her blood boil. These were Valencia's own citizens. A rider broke rank from the rest and approached the gate on horseback, stopping short. We will give you 5 minutes to send out your representative to discuss the conditions of your surrender. If no one comes, we will break down your gate and kill every man, woman, and child within the walls. The choice is yours. Another rider approached, carrying a small tray, holding what looked like an hourglass filled with sand. The commander flipped it over and sat quietly, his eyes fixated on the gate. Below them, she could see Captain Black preparing to exit. Kill every man, woman, and child inside? Just to make a point? Rose began climbing down the ladder. What are you doing? There are over 2,000 soldiers out there. We could prepare the harbor ship to escape with the wounded, women, and children. Any of your neighbors would accept them. Come with me, Blaine, unless you'd rather watch from up here. Blaine sighed and followed. One of the men offered Captain Black a tower shield, which he declined. He did not want to look afraid when he rode out. As Rose neared the gate, Captain Black saluted her and then nodded to Blaine. Wish me luck, he said. I'll go out now. No need to waste time and play their games, Rose said. I don't think that's wise. They think you're dead. It works best for us to let them keep thinking that as long as possible. If you reveal yourself, this will go from a single battle to an all-out war. Give me a chance to talk to them. Rose frowned, then looked at Blaine, who was already nodding in agreement. You showing your face should be a last resort, Rose. No matter what you do, let's at least exhaust every other option first. Fine, but don't get close. I want you to be shouting so I can hear from the gate. Captain Black nodded and exited the city. A chorus of laughter could be heard from the soldiers as the unkempt man approached on foot. He stopped a suitable distance from them, just as promised. Captain Black joined the laughter. You sent an awful lot of men for a few dozen escaped convicts. Do I scare you that badly? The laughter stopped. You're a bold man to speak to an army that way. Stupid would describe it better. But what do you mean, a few dozen convicts? We've been holding the city hostage ever since the traitor queen came through, intending on robbing ships that came into the harbor. Turns out word has already spread and everyone's suspended deliveries for the time being. So here we are, fighting and dying for nothing. Did you think this was a rebel stronghold? Where do you get your intelligence from? My men and I are all escaped prisoners, and we've had our fun. So just take us back and let's call it a day. Take you back? What you're saying is true. You and your men are heading straight to the gallows. Of course, I don't believe you. You're trying to sacrifice yourself and a handful of men to save a town. Your men will be noble of you and quite smart, I have to say. Your men will be tortured for information, but out of respect, I'll offer you a quick death. Wait, what about the terms of surrender? Captain Black said, taking a step forward. I should have expected a lie. You'd plan on purging Bellenhurst anyway. You just wanted to lure out as many commanders as possible. The laughter broke out again. Rose had had enough. If she listened to another word, she'd explode. Blaine reached for her wrist, but she yanked it away. Follow, Blaine, unless you're content from watching here. Blaine chuckled despite the situation, picking up the tower shield that was left by the gate. Right behind you, Your Majesty. When Rose approached, the enemy's laughter stopped instantly. Many of the men knew what they were looking at. Rather, who they were looking at. Will you not dismount your horses and kneel before your queen? Rose asked. Kneel before a false queen like? The commander teetered on his saddle, then fell onto the ground. He struggled to rise to his feet, but could only make it as far as his knees. His face was pale, though he still looked at her with defiance. Valencia will not suffer another blood queen. How righteous of you, Commander. If only you weren't the same man who threatened to butcher innocent men, women, and children. She didn't even need to raise her hand anymore. She only needed to look in the direction. Something had changed with her power again. It was growing as she became more in tune with it. Was it because she was accepting it, or was it accepting her? Or was she losing control again? Oh, he reached for a sword and Blaine took a step forward. Rose raised her hand and he stopped. The commander tried to draw his sword, but couldn't. He lacked the strength. Rose shouted to as many soldiers that could hear her as possible. Here are the terms of surrender. Leave or die for the whims of usurpers and traitors. To Rose's surprise, many of the men had dismounted with their horses and dropped to their knees. We were forced to come, Your Majesty. Many of our families were threatened. Please show us mercy, one said. Kill her! Valencia's future depends on stopping her here and now, the commander shouted. While nearly half of the men had dismounted and showed support, the other half drew their swords. If they turned blades on one another, this would be an even bloodier battle than it was already meant to be. Rose's eyes glowed brighter than they ever had, cutting through the growing darkness of dusk. Archers readied their bows but collapsed before they could fire them. The men who had drawn their swords could no longer hold them. The hourglass had fallen to the ground, still upright. Just as it did, the last grain of sand fell to the bottom. As far as the eye could see, numbering in the thousands, the bodies of soldiers covered the ground like laid-over blades of grass. Captain Black stood in disbelief, as did Blaine. Even though they'd both seen her power in action before, this was something new altogether. Blaine dropped to his knees, letting the shield fall to the ground. Captain Black wandered over to one body, kneeling beside it and places his hands over the shoulders' eyes to close them. As his hand ran down the face, his eyes grew wide, and he turned to face Rose. Rose was just as surprised by the fact that she was still standing. She wasn't dead or wobbly on her feet. She felt fine. Though this wasn't what had Captain Black's attention. He's alive? He jumped to his feet, running over to another soldier, then another, until he checked well over a dozen. Rose nodded. Did I succeed? Are they still alive? Blaine rose to his feet, shaking his head. I've seen many things in my travels, magic of all kinds. Power I would never believe existed if I hadn't witnessed it myself. This is on a completely different level. This will be a story told for generations. It will change the way people of Valencia see blood magic. Are you all right? You seem... I'm fine. I'm not sure how, but I'm fine. I think it has something to do with my emotions. I wasn't angry when I used my power this time. I just really wanted to end this without bloodshed. A blood mage avoiding bloodshed in a battle of thousands where not one person died. Now I've really seen it all, Captain Black said. It's going to take the rest of the night to tie up all the prisoners. Outfit anyone here with their weapons and armor and lock up the rest. Blaine, you and I will ride at first light. It's likely there were scouts that saw what happened from afar and withdrew before my magic could reach them. They'll probably think everyone's dead, but that's fine for now, Rose said. I'm glad Valenhurst is a port town, Blaine said. Why is that? Captain Black asked with a grin. Nowhere else would have had enough rope. The two men laughed. A smile formed on Rose's lips, and she laughed with him. That's the end of that chapter. Let's see, how many chapters we got left? 1, 2, 3. 3 and an epilogue. So we're chugging along quite finely here. Take a sip of my nice hot tea. Okay. Diana felt a hard slap across her face, but it was tough to tell whether she was dreaming or awake. Everything felt like it was moving in slow motion, including her thoughts. A second slap, she could peel open her eyes. The pain came surging back. 2. She was hurt. Nothing life-threatening, but she wouldn't sprint out of here performing acrobatics. A couple of ribs were broken, and her left arm fell off. Fractured, maybe. The stab wound in her leg had been patched up. Someone didn't want her dying too soon. That's right. There was a second wind mage. She was captured and... Damn. Wake up, clever little assassin. I told you I had questions for you, he said, sounding clearer this time. He grabbed her by the mouth, raising her face to look at him. She promptly spat in his face. Get it over with. I won't give you any information about the Queen. I'm a loyal subject, you see. The man let go of her face and laughed, shaking his head as he walked across the room. Oh, you poor woman. Do you think I care about your Queen? At this rate, your country is doing a wonderful job destroying itself. Why would I want to stop either side? The longer the Civil War goes on, the bigger it gets, the easier it will be for Astani to come in and save the day. So no, I couldn't care less about your Queen, regardless of which one you main. Ah, that's right. Blaine said as much. Diana looked around the room. Windows were boarded, so they were clearly somewhere outside the castle. A shed of some sort, obviously not built for interrogation. He wanted her brought out here so he could do all the asking himself, and now it was clear why. He wanted her uncle to believe he was here to aid him, but the reason was more personal. His back was still turned. A quick pull and a wiggle. See what's loose. At first, everything seemed sturdy, but she realized after a second yank of her feet that the bolt holding those shackles was anchored shallow. With a hard enough pull, it would come right out. But with his power, none of that would matter if she wasted the opportunity. An opening. She'd have to wait for a perfect opening if she lived long enough to see it. There are a few ways to buy time against arrogant men. One she'd use on the other mage. Seduction. That wouldn't work here. Get him to talk about himself would be the next best thing. Worth a try, but first, play dumb. So if you aren't interested in the queen, what exactly are you interested in? He turned and stood right in front of her again. Blaingrave is a friend of yours, is he not? Considering he beat me up and threw me out of a window, what would give you that impression? Is that how you treat your friends in Estonia? A few reasons. One, you knew the Estonian diplomats were here and went straight for one of them. We've only just arrived, so that information could have only come from a few sources. You couldn't even wait to the end of the stream? Okay. But two, and a far more compelling reason, is that you were still alive. I had a hard time believing you weren't spared intentionally. Blaine was let go from his role as bodyguard by your idiot chief advisor, so we narrowly missed him, and now must resort to our own investigation work. Why would Estonia send 2 wind mages into the middle of a civil war for one man? Now I'm curious why some random foreigner would be of more interest to you than the appearance of a blood mage. He paced from one side of the room to the other, considering his response. No, I don't suppose it would hurt to tell you. You don't need the full story. Our spy master was murdered. Everyone who was aboard the airship with him disappeared into thin air. Blaine is almost certainly the culprit. How would you like to become rich? I'm sorry to hear about what happened to your spy master. If he's anything like the other wind mages I've met, I'm sure he was a great guy. This got a chuckle out of him. How would you like to become rich, Diana? Diana grinned. Oh, so you know my name. Are you asking me to marry you? That's sweet. But I'm not sure I can marry a man who likes to tie up a woman on the first date. And that's usually the second or third date for me. I'm asking you to work for me. Is the concept of a blade for hire not appealing to you? The gold bounty Estonia is offering for Blaine, even split between the two of us, would make you wealthy beyond your wildest dreams. You could purchase your own land, build a mansion on it, start a business, or buy several of them. Judging by how our first meeting went, I have a hard time believing a normal man with that magic power of his could best a mage I'm supposed to believe was what? Even stronger than you? Forgive me if I'm too slow to follow along, but it sounds to me like you're just hoping to use me to get information about the queen. Or maybe you hope that if I team up with you, you'll be able to get close to her and remove another obstacle. Perhaps you care more about Blaine, but you won't convince me that a blood mage neighbor is of no concern of Estonia. He sighed. The easy way isn't going to work, I see. Fine, the hard way it is. He raised his hand and Diana could feel the air being restricted. She needed to act now, but he was too far away. The room dulled and she struggled against the sensation of suffocating. He released his power and she gasped, taking nearly a minute to get her breath back. Tying up a girl and choking her on the first date? Should really learn to take things a little slower. Ever heard of flowers? He brought his hand up again, and despite her best efforts, she eventually blacked out this time. She awoke to him standing there, watching her patiently to regain consciousness. This was an awful feeling, and terrifying. It would be better to be tortured by traditional means. He scratched his forehead and frowned. You're not going to give me anything, are you, even if I kill you? Diana shook her head and answered weakly, but defiantly. Nope. Any last words? Kill me with your dagger if you're going to do it. Make it quick. He raised his eyebrow. Very well, a warrior's death then. He picked up the dagger that was sitting on the small table at the opposite end of the room, next to a lantern that was their only source of light. He stood in front of her and pressed the tip of the dagger against her chest. Not a perfect spacing, but she'd make it work. Her knees shot up, ripping the bolt easily from the floor, slamming into his groin. He doubled over, putting his face in perfect position for the follow-up strike. Her other knee slammed into his face, breaking his nose and loosening his grip on the dagger. Diana gripped it with her feet just below the guard and slammed it through his chin and into his mouth. He gasped and fell back onto the floor. He didn't move and didn't look like he would soon. She flipped herself upside down and, after some fiddling, finally loosened the ropes around her wrist using her feet. One of the many odd things she'd been trained to do as an assassin. She fell to the floor, untied her feet, then pulled the dagger from the mage's face. Surely there would be somebody watching the door. Another risked way. Then she eyed the lamp, picking it up and throwing it against the wall. I'm gonna sneeze. Oh. She picked up a stone and quickly climbed up into the beams of the ceiling, positioning herself above the door. As soon as the room filled with smoke, the roof would fill up first. Why couldn't this shed have a fireplace? She threw the rock through the window and waited. Only a moment later, 2 men rushed inside. She wasted no time dropping behind them and hobbling out the door unseen. Now, she needed to get a horse and be off before the next person wanted to kill her showed up. Sneaking up behind a man braiding a horse's mane with a red ribbon, she put a blade to his neck. "The finest horse in these stables, or your life," she said. "But all the best horses are with the Queen's Guard. Please, I'm just a worker." "Queen's Guard? What do you mean?" she asked. They just left to transport the Queen to a safe location. The Blood Mage survived, and they say she slaughtered 2,000 soldiers in Vellenhurst. How long ago did they leave? Not 20 minutes past. Gah! This one will suffice, she said, grabbing the spool of ribbon and scissors, then mounting the old mare. She sped from the stable. 20 minutes wasn't long. She would cut the ribbon to leave a trail and hope Blaine and Rose would piece everything together in time. Are you sure now is the time? Oh, that's the end of that chapter. But we're going to continue on. I don't think I need a drink right now. Are you sure now is the time? Rose asked Blaine as they entered the capital. A good time as any, considering the stories that are probably being passed around right now. Anyone can take a throne. Holding it is the problem. Maybe a leader like the previous Blood Queen would hold a throne of fear alone, but I've seen that fail far too often. And good that it does. No one deserves to live in constant fear of their ruler. After what you just did, they won't so much fear you, but admire and respect you. You had every reason to kill all of them. It would have been much easier. At this point, I think Count Blackwell and his mysterious backers are about to call it quits, especially if Diana succeeded. Rose nodded. I'm finding Diana first. That's my top priority. We started this journey together, and we have to finish it together. Blaine nodded. I thought you might say that. Say, isn't the gate normally more heavily guarded? I haven't seen any patrols either. I would have thought after last night this place would swarm with soldiers and we'd have to fight our way in. I always feel uneasy when the enemy lets me walk right in. An ambush? She asked. No, they'd have found us on the road before we showed up here. Something is very off. Maybe because Diana took care of the Wind Mage. Maybe, Blaine said, scratching his head as the voice trailed. A man shouted to another in the street, startling them. They finally got that fire under control at the stables, he said. Oh no, do you think it was the Blood Queen? An elderly woman asked. Not everything is the Blood Queen's fault, you know. Some foreigner had a prisoner in there and something went wrong. It's all squared away now. Still, I think we should get to packing. I don't want to be here when she arrives with her massive army to save us all. Blaine and Rose looked at one another. I think we'd better check out the stables, Blaine said. Follow me, Rose answered, veering off the main street and through the various alleyways, not at all meant for horses. She knew this route well. The stables connected with the castle. The foreigner they mentioned was almost certainly the Wind Mage. When they arrived at the stables, one servant immediately recognized Rose, dropping to her knees. Queen Valencia! Thank God you're here. Oh, thank God! It's chaos! First they say you killed thousands of soldiers, then someone assassinated a Wind Mage. The other Wind Mage captured her and interrogated her in the shed by the stables. Then it caught fire somehow and the mage inside narrowly escaped a deadly blow from her dagger. Now he's awoken and is rampaging like this is his kingdom. He said he's going to temporarily hold the throne since Valencia threatens Estonia. Breathe! How can he hold the throne while a queen still sits on it? Surely not even Count Blackwell would allow such a thing, would he? Rose asked, looking to Blaine. It's possible, he said. He's nowhere to be found, Your Majesty. Your sister left with Count Blackwell and the Queen's Guard only a little while ago. No one knows where they went. Where is the assassin? Did she escape? We don't know. We only saw her leave the building, but they didn't find a body. She disappeared completely. A young man came running up to him. She didn't disappear. She robbed me and stole my cousin's horse. Even stole the ribbon I was braiding in her hair. If you catch her, I'll pay you a reward to bring the horse back. Before they could even process what the man had said, another voice came from across the stables. An older man came stumbling toward them, holding a bloody cloth to his chin. Well, as if it isn't Blaine Grave. If I'd have known you were coming to me, I'd have prepared a better welcome. He coughed more blood into the cloth as he finished the sentence. Diana had left him with a nasty injury. Blaine ignored him, returning to Rose. I'm sorry to ask this, but fights with wind mages can cause a lot of collateral damage. You can't really waste time on him right now. Rose nodded. Gladly. Ooh, is this the famed Blood Queen? Both of my targets fell into my hand at the same time. Truly, my bad fortune has turned to good. Rose shook her head. No, it just got worse. She held out her hand and the smile disappeared from the wind mage's face. Her eyes glowed and she concentrated. Only no magic came. Instead, she vomited blood, collapsing to her knees. Blaine, Stop! Blaine shouted, drawing his sword. Don't try to use any more power. The wind mage laughed. Guess it was a shift to good luck after all. Blaine held his sword in front of him, still as stone. He wasn't excited, nor was he nervous. It was practiced. Just one more duel atop the many had come before it. Bad still. She would have spared you. I won't. I know all your tools, Blaine. That magical sword you carry makes for quite the trick if one isn't expecting it. Unfortunately, I won't make the mistake of those who come before you. You wait for me to act and deflect my magic. Only your patience. Blaine charged forward, not allowing the mage to finish his introduction. Wind magic allowed fantastic mobility, and the mage easily lifted himself through the air, many times the speed of the most agile warrior. You don't even want to know the name of the one who will kill you? If I thought you capable of it, I would ask, Blaine replied. The mage growled, sending a burst of wind directly at Blaine, then dodged to avoid the inevitable counter. However, Blaine waited until the last possible moment, read the direction of the mage's movement. When he countered, the wind mage intercepted the man mid-dodge, sending him hard into the ground. He quickly recovered, using the wind to propel himself back to his feet, sending another blast at Blaine. This time, Blaine moved his sword more slowly, catching the magic gently and redirecting it behind him. The magic, catching him in the back, shot him forward directly at the wind mage. The mage stumbled back, unable to react in time. He reached for the sword on his side, but only grasped it before Blaine's sword pierced his chest. His eyes were wide as he fell to the ground, dead. As blood poured from his wound, it made its way across the ground in a thin line drawn to Rose. It covered her hands briefly before being absorbed into her body. Blaine, I think... Blaine held his finger to his lips, nodding to the surrounding audience. It was easy to forget they weren't alone, as everyone had run for cover since the fight started. They were still being watched, and secrets like these needed to be guarded. We need to go. Can you stand? She nodded. Blaine helped her to her feet and onto her horse. You think we could track them? Rose asked. Blaine frowned as the two made their way to the gate again. I'm not sure. There's so much traffic in and out of the capital right now that it would almost be impossible now that there's so much time has passed. Do you have any idea where they could have gone? Rose thought quietly, considering every possibility. Oh, how he wished her mother would have involved her more in royal affairs. That her mother had involved herself more in royal affairs. She didn't even know about the cave. She racked every corner of her mind for something, anything that might guide them, and came up with nothing. She and Blaine exited the gate, then stopped in the road, staring ahead. Blaine was silent. They looked at several roads leading out, but they all looked the same. Then Rose spotted something. Didn't the man in the stables say she stole a ribbon? Blaine nodded. He did. Rose pointed to a piece of ribbon on the road. Blaine hopped off his horse and ran to pick it up, holding up for her to see. It's definitely a ribbon, he said. Good enough to follow? The only win today was from our dead friend at the stable. Diana's a clever woman. Blaine, will you help me one last time to rescue Diana and my sister? Blaine only laughed. You already know the answer to that. I've got nothing better to do today. Rose smiled and charged ahead with Blaine close beside her. Alright, we're on the last chapter before the epilogue, I think. My sonny here is still snoozing away. He's enjoying the book too. He loves to listen to some narration. Especially after the day he's had. He had a new puppy to contend with for babysitting. My kiddo puppy sat today. I mean, this time he didn't think he was gonna be killed, but... and he wasn't. The puppy was a fantastic puppy. Alright, next chapter. Diana looked down at the spool of ribbon, wondering if she'd made the best use of it after all. It was nearly empty, and she hadn't tracked down the group yet. Blaine and Rose were far enough behind that they'd never be able to track her any other way. Assuming that they were even coming. She could stop and wait, but if she did, she wouldn't be able to track them anymore either. If she went ahead, she might as well be on her own, carrying a bunch of injuries, a torn dress that wouldn't be adequate armor against the light breeze, and only one dagger. The Queen's Guard was no joke. Each was specialized in his or her own talent and heavily experienced. Assassins, commanders, duelists, strategists. They'll have studied in the terrain and would probably lay traps once they arrived if they hadn't already. They'll notice anyone approaching and are more likely to attack first and ask questions later. At the very least, she could figure out where they went and go back for help. They wouldn't stand a chance against Rose, and to be a normal person like her, Blaine was no slouch. The three of them could do it. With a small unit, they could do it easily. But that wasn't factoring in her uncle's tricks. Would he be willing to use Princess Aline as a hostage to save his own skin? By now, he'll have molded the Queen's Guard unit to be a unit loyal to him first. They'll treat Aline as a puppet just as he had. Rose would be unable to act. Blaine might not be willing to either. Could she? Rose would never forgive her, but if they let them go, she'll never be able to rule in peace. Aline would continue being a puppet under a different strategy. No, this had to end here. She needed to play it smart. Don't be rash. Think. She'd space the ribbon out further. By now, if they made it this far, they'll be looking for them carefully. She'd save it for forks and intersections, or if she needed to leave the beaten path. Just as she was bracing herself for a very long ride, something caught her eye in the road. She stopped and stared at it. They were attacked here. It was blood, but no sign of a struggle. Her own blood ran cold. She had a terrible feeling about this and didn't know what to make of it. A little further ahead, there was a body. She dismounted and examined it carefully. By now, they were well off the roads traveled by merchants and citizens. These roads went to the border, where there would be many great opportunities to build a hideout. Surely they didn't intend to stop here, where only hunting cabins were found. They were mostly abandoned this time of year because of the mild weather, but they were far from ideal fortifications. Most of them barely made good shelters from the rain. They served only one real purpose, and that was having a warm place to spend the night in the winter. What were they doing stopping here? She nearly mounted her horse again when she saw something else in the distance. Another body. Again, no injuries. Blood almost dry. Had Rose gotten ahead of her somehow? That wasn't possible. There wasn't any real shortcut, and they would be at least an hour before her, even if they'd let Bellenhurst at first light. A trail of blood led into the woods. Through the trees, she could see the outline of a cabin. This was it. She desperately wanted to be her usual reckless self and make a move. Instead, she took a deep breath and sighed. For once, she would play it carefully. She'd hide herself just off the road a little way back and wait for Rose and Blaine. Rose grew more nervous as they continued to ride, considering all the sinister strategies Count Blackwell could be using. Blaine, I want your opinion on something, she said, slowing down so they could hear and understand one another. What's on your mind? He asked. Do you think they intend to take Aline across the border to Estonia? Blaine sighed, nodding. I'm sorry, Rose, that was my suspicion too. We'll never catch them before they make it. Diana can't take on a group like that on her own, even if she caught them. I will just have to motivate Estonia to return her if that's the case. Good luck motivating those arrogant pricks to do anything, he said. All they care about is expanding the realm. And instead of just asking nicely, they want to sow chaos amongst their neighbors so they could swoop in and pick up the pieces with plenty of conditions. If it will get Aline back, I will allow them to build the rail through Valencia freely. That's the problem. I suspect they might have been willing to just ask nicely before blood magic resurfaced in Valencia. Now they see you, and by extension Valencia, as a threat to their kingdom. It won't be as simple as getting her back to build the rail. They'll likely want to return her to the throne and have you exchange yourself. If they don't execute you outright, they'll find some way to imprison you. Don't make deals with them. If that's what it takes to get Aline back, then maybe... Blaine grabbed her horse's reins, bringing them both to a stop. Is that what you plan on doing if they take her over the border? Sacrificing herself? Do you think they'll stop there? They'll use her anyway and probably make your people break their backs. to expand a rail system that only exploits them. And what would Diana say? Rose clenched her teeth. He was right, but what else could she do? If she did that, they'd gain sympathy from the other kingdoms. It would be what happened to Arthurus all over again. Paratrus would send their holy army to take her queendom, to avoid blood magic becoming a threat to their own land. Other kingdoms in the Thalos would support them. Powerful as she was, she barely even understood her power yet. She couldn't take on the entire world. But if it meant saving Aline and protecting Diana, maybe she'd try. Rose yanked the reins from Blaze's hands. We can have this discussion later. I promise to seek advice before acting on my own. Only I can't promise I'll follow it. Blaine sighed, sticking close to Rose as they galloped onward. As you wish, Your Majesty, he mumbled under his breath. Suddenly, a woman ran from the woods and began waving at them. Rose's horses reared, almost throwing her. Blaine drew his sword, but quickly placed it back in the sheath when he realized who had stopped them. Diana! Rose shouted, nearly leaping from her horse and into her arms. Ow! Please be gentle. I feel like I've been trampled by a dozen horses already, she said. You look it, Blaine said, smiling. But you look alive, and after what you did, I think it counts as a miracle. Diana flexed her biceps. Told you I could do it. Why did you wave us down here, of all places? Rose asked. Diana pointed to the body she dragged off the road. I have no idea. I think they meant to keep traveling, but something or someone kept them from continuing. There's a cabin just ahead, barely into the woods. They're hiding out there, or perhaps taking a break. No one's come out. I haven't heard or seen anything since I got here less than an hour ago. So, I assume everything is all right for now. Something isn't all right about the bodies, so I waited for backup. I'm in no condition to fight more wind mages, or whatever it is we're dealing with. I'm glad you waited instead of being reckless. It's all over now. Between the three of us, the Queen's Guard won't pose much of a threat. After seeing Blaine handle the wind mage you stabbed, I'm confident he'll handle any other that appear. Wait, that guy survived? Diana asked, raising her eyebrows dramatically. Briefly, Blaine said, grinning. Diana stepped over and punched him in the arm. I knew there was a reason I liked you. Thanks for giving him one for me. Okay. Ugh. You two can sprain your shoulders patting each other on the back later. Let's grab O'Leen, deal with Count Blackwell, and go celebrate. After Diana sees a royal physician. Blaine dismounted, removing a short bow and a quiver from his horse. Are you any good with that thing? Diana asked. Trained a bit with maybe the best archer in Nethalos. I'm more comfortable with it than without it when wind mages are a factor. They're a problem in the trees. Rose nodded and made her way toward the cabin. It was quiet, but they still took their time, careful not to make too much noise. Blaine lunged forward, throwing out his arm in front of Rose. A bolt stuck out of his forearm, but he behaved as though he'd been bitten by a mere mosquito. He quickly knocked an arrow, drew back the string, and fired calmly. A second later, a body fell from a nearby tree and landed with a thud on the ground. Blaine pulled the bolt from his arm and tossed it aside. A touch modest about the bow, Diana said. Are you all right? Rose interrupted before he could respond to Diana. Yeah, thankfully she rushed the shot. It was dangerous. Really had the jump on us, he said, wiping his forehead. Diana narrowed her eyes at him, but Rose continued until they finally arrived at the door. Rose placed her hand in the handle, but Diana grabbed her wrist before she could pull it open. She spoke in a whisper. I have the best reflexes, so I'll go in first. Blaine could cover me since he's quick for a big guy. Okay, he has better reflexes than I do, but you can't be ambushed or we're through. That much was true. If Rose was taken out before she could use her magic, Blaine and Diana would be in major trouble. Blaine already fought the wind mage earlier and was just shot in the arm. It was amazing that Diana was still standing and conscious. She hoped her magic would even work. Okay, Rose said, giving Diana a quick kiss. Please be careful. Diana offered a weak smile, then nodded to Blaine, who hovered over her, wiping away the sweat beading across his forehead. He dropped his bow and drew his sword. Strange that fighting a wind mage didn't make him nervous, but something like this did. Strange. Diana opened the door, rushing inside with Blaine behind her. Both stopped suddenly, with Blaine grabbing Diana and throwing her to the side. He swung his sword, but almost looked like a child. The weight of the swing pulled him to the ground. Blood ran from his eyes and nose. He coughed and spat blood from his lips. Rose ran in behind them, putting herself between Blaine and their attacker. "Oline?" Rose shouted, looking around to see who the attacker was. Only no one else was standing there. Only Oline. Her eyes glowed golden. Count Blackwell was almost unrecognizable, other than his clothing. He'd been bled dry. Armored huts littered the room, holding the mummified remains of the soldiers that once inhabited him. "Move aside, Rose. Don't you recognize her? That's his niece. He's been using you, and Blaine was working for him too. He's loyal to him, not us." "Oline, stop," Rose pleaded. "You're wrong. Blaine risked his everything to help us. His true goal was to keep you safe. And I love Diana. Don't hurt her. You have no idea what I've been through while you've been doing whatever you want, making friends with the enemy. Do you know how badly I missed you? How hard I begged God to bring you back to me? How much I cried when you never came? You were my big sister. I counted on you. I needed you." "Oline, I'm so sorry. You're right. I should have been there for you. I should have protected you. I was scared, but that's no excuse. I failed you, but it's all over now. I promise I will never let anything happen to you again." Diana coughed, pointing to Blaine. "Rose, poison." The blood magic had hit Diana too. Blaine couldn't time it because of the poison, and it ended up split between them. Not enough to kill them, but they were badly wounded now. Blaine dropped his sword. "Don't worry about me. Save Oline." His eyes were dark, and he fell unconscious. "Blaine!" Oline shouted, covering her mouth with her hands, though she only wavered briefly. "It can't be helped. Blood magic is only good for one purpose: ruling with power and fear, inflicting violence and horror on your enemies. We should embrace it, Rose. We don't need anyone to protect us anymore, even if we care about them." "No!" Rose screamed, dropping her knees next to Blaine. She held her hand toward Diana, transferring some of her own blood to her. She turned her attention back to Blaine. "I'll show you, Oline. We don't have to be ruthless blood queens. Blood magic is like all other magic. It mirrors the heart of the user. I'll prove it to you." With one hand, she pulled tainted blood from Blaine's own body into her own. With the other, she transferred her own blood to him. She concentrated, trying to purify it with her own body, filter good blood black. Nothing she'd ever attempted demanded so much raw power and concentration. She didn't know anything about poisons. She invented this technique on the spot and never practiced it, unlike the experiment she performed on the rats. It was all theory, but she had to show Oline she was wrong. Blaine had taught her it was more effective to show than explain. Their grandmother was just an evil woman who abused blood magic, no more and no less. She knew the bloodlust had gripped Oline's mind. After all, she'd experienced the same struggle and nearly lost herself in it. She would have, without Diana. Rose coughed up the poison, spitting it on the floor. She could feel it paralyzing her muscles. She was losing all sensation in her hands and her feet. Moments later, the same happened to her arms and her legs, though she continued to channel the power. "It's going to kill you if you take much more in, Rose. Take my blood. I don't care if it kills me, just take it," Diana said, stumbling over and hugging her from behind. The golden glow of Oline's eyes dimmed, giving way to tears. She panicked. Her hands trembled and she paced. "Sister, I don't want you or Blaine to die. Tell me how to help." Rose reached out, clutching Oline's hand. "Pull the blood from his body, slowly. Imagine your happiest moments, what it feels like to be healthy and energetic, to laugh, to be young and vibrant, to smile. When you pull in his blood and it makes you feel sick and weak, overpower it. Rewrite it with your magic. Turn the pain into joy and give it back to him. You liked Blaine, didn't you?" "I did, and I do," Oline said, nodding quickly. "He protected me from those around me who would have done even worse if he wasn't there. I'm sorry, Blaine." She watched Rose and mimicked pouring her own power, more roughly. She'd take too much, give too much, purify too little, give it back too slowly. Then, little by little, she got the hang of it. Blaine opened his eyes and put a hand on each of their shoulders. "Thank you. I thought I was a goner. Somehow I actually feel better than I have in years. Almost like I'm younger." "That was Brisbane extract, you moron. You're the first to survive it," Diana said. making a fist and drawing back like she was about to punch him. Instead, she gripped both hands on the side of Rose's face and pulled her roughly into a long kiss. When the two finished, Aline sobbed loudly, wrapping her arms around Rose's waist and falling into her lap like a child. "Don't ever leave me again," she said, sniffing between every word. "Never again," Rose said, patting her on the back. Time for the epilogue. Two queens, are you certain, Your Majesty? I mean, it eliminates the possibility of support of splitting and feuding, but... And there you have it. That reason alone is sufficient, Rose said to the elderly woman, a former servant. One of her many new advisors pulled from various locations and classes. Since you're standing there, do you mind zipping my dress? The woman nodded, taking a step forward and pulling the zipper carefully. Your Majesty, this dress is so form-fitting and revealing. Do you intend to wear it under another? Diana picked it up for me, so no, I like it. Besides, it isn't that revealing. I hope you'll forgive me by saying so, but many believe Diana is a bad influence on you. I agree with them, Rose said, smiling. I'm the evil blood queen, remember? I should act the part at least a little. The woman smiled. Oh, you've been nothing but kind to everyone. Even the rest of Nautilus will see my queen as the villain. Her people will know the truth. Rose placed a hand on the woman's shoulder. No one would try to bully a country ruled by not one blood queen, but two, right? I don't mind so much that they believe we're the embodiment of evil. I'm told even Estonia has called off all covert operations in Valencia and will draft a peaceful negotiation strategy. You'd negotiate with those devils? Of course! Oh, and about the two-queen thing. Maybe I just want to protect my little sister. Blood magic is still dangerous and prone to running wild. We need to keep each other in check. The woman smiled and bowed. You were wise. Music began playing and Rose took a deep breath. Do you really think the dress is too much? Rose asked. I reconsidered. It suits you, the woman said, laughing. And besides, it's time for you to go out there. A little late now. Rose sighed and nodded, slapping both hands across her face and walking to the doorway. She could see Aline across from her. No dress at all. Pants and shirt with a long, flowing coat. Showering her up in the elegance department. Aline was always the cute one, though. All grown up now. And safe. Most importantly, safe. She waved at Rose, and Rose waved back. The music finally finished, and a loud voice filled the throne room. Presenting Queen Aline Valencia I and Queen Rose Valencia III. Aline had insisted on leaving out the Blood Queen part, worried it might tie them too closely with their grandmother. It was the right call. The two walked out together, bowed to one another, and sat on matching side-by-side thrones. Long live Valencia's queens! Long live Valencia's queens! Long live Valencia's queens! Shouted everyone in perfect unity. The queens each have an order of first official business to begin their reign, the young announcer said, before joining the others in the crowd. Rose cleared her throat and crossed her legs. Diana Blackwell, please approach. Diana grinned, nearly hopping on her tiptoes up the small stairs leading to the throne, not realizing she was supposed to stop at the bottom. She grabbed Rose's hand and kissed it before kneeling. At your service, Your Majesty, and nice dress, she said, uttering a purring sound that prompted several gasps in the crowd. Anyway, I wanted my first official act as queen to be recognizing for all you've done for Valencia, and for me. When you found me, I was hiding away in a cave. I felt as though my people had rejected and abandoned me, so I rejected and abandoned them. You'd encouraged me to take back what has been taken from me and to prove to everyone that blood magic wasn't simply a tool of evil. Rather, simply a tool... Will you, She looked over to Blaine, who gave her a thumbs up and a wink. Will you honor me by being my queen consort? It will take only a few days to fashion a proper consort's throne next to mine, so... Diana hopped into her lap, prompting even more gasps with a few whistles mixed in this time. Forget the other throne. I prefer this seat. Also, give me a kiss and maybe I'll agree. Rose didn't hesitate. This time, there was complete silence. Blaine took a step forward, starting an applause. Congratulations, Queen Consort Diana Blackwell. With a hint of hesitation, everyone joined him in a thunderous applause. Shouts of congratulations followed. This was certainly the most informal coronation ceremony Valencia had ever experienced, but the excitement was clear to see on the face of every attendee. Even those who felt awkward still wore genuine smiles for a hopeful future. Aline cleared her throat. As for me, Blaine Grave, please step forward. Blaine took a knee at the bottom of the stairs. Your Majesty, he said. You are a foreigner so far from home, and yet you risked your life to protect me from when I was in the most danger. You did the same for Rose. From enemies outside Valencia and within. As my power of queen, I name you Hero of Valencia, an honorary citizen. If you are within our borders, you will never feel like a foreigner again. Consider Valencia your home away from home. Blaine nodded and stood to his feet. Thank you, Your Majesty. Captain Black of the Queen's Guard, please present the medal, Aline said, waving him over. He approached Blaine, standing on the tips of his toes, stretching his arms to place the medal over his head. Blaine grinned and bent forward to close the distance, prompting a chuckle from the captain and others in the room. The two men shook hands, and the captain returned to his place. Aline began fidgeting with her hair. Would you like... you know... Rose raised a brow. Your Majesty? Blaine asked, turning to face her. Her face turned bright red. You know, from the Queen. She brought her fingers to her lips. Rose's eyes went wide. Diana's jaw dropped. They were such idiots. It should have been so obvious by the way she spoke of Blaine. Had she realized it sooner, Rose would have had a talk with his sister about the topic before the ceremony. All she could do now was narrow her eyes at Blaine and hope he'd handle the matter with tact. Blaine took a step forward before she could finish her sentence and patted her head. A hug from Queen Aline would never be better than A hug from Queen Aline would be better than any medal I could ever win. Rose exhaled with relief far more loudly than she intended. Aline stood to her feet, wrapping her arms around Blaine's waist and hugging him tightly, tears filling her eyes. Are you leaving so soon? She whispered. Sorry, Blaine replied. Aline took a step back, shaking her head and wiping her eyes. Good luck on your travels. Please be safe and visit us again someday. Blaine bowed deeply and began walking back. Blaine! Diana shouted. As he turned, she unbuckled a dagger from her thigh and threw it. He caught it, drew it, and held it up to the light. A fine blade. Don't you dare stick the thing in a box somewhere. Put it to use so I'll be disappointed, Diana said, grinning. Blaine nodded and rejoined the crowd. Aline sat on her throne and wiped her nose, smiling. Rose smiled at her. The young female herald stood in front of the thrones again, looking over the crowd. This concludes the coronation ceremony. At the insistence of Lady Blackwell, unlimited drinks are available in the dining hall, and a celebration will be held until the light of morning. Cheers erupted, and the hall quickly emptied. I'm really proud of you, and I love you, Diana said, gripping Rose's hand. How about you prove it? Rose said, pressing her lips together. And that is the end of the story. Again, that was A Kiss of Blood and Blades, and if you would like to check it out for yourself, it's in the pinned comment. Let's see. I believe we're gonna raid Atsumori because there's not a lot of people on right now, which is kind of weird. Mr. Brogeth, would you get a raid message ready, please? Tomorrow I'll be back at 2 p.m. EST for Art of Belinda Sunday. We're gonna finish off my About panel, and then I'll be changing everything tomorrow evening. And then after I'm done drawing, we will play Final Fantasy III. And then also tomorrow's schedule will also be posted. So I hope you all have a good night. And I'll see you guys tomorrow.